Chapter 327. He only had one choice, to leave the capital. Fortunately, the world was very large, and the Ing sect was still in the south. Even if he couldn't, he still had quite a few of his fellow disciples in the south. As someone who had once roamed the Jianghu, he naturally didn't have to worry about survival. Even so, when he thought about the career he had worked so hard for, he still felt a sense of reluctance. But when he recalled the chaotic scene in the U residence, his reluctance was replaced by determination. UUMB had not returned home and had even cut off all contact with his family, causing the entire U residence to become tense. This was precisely what he had seen with his own eyes. Perhaps Yu Shuriwa had already thought of a certain possibility. If Yintao didn't leave now, he probably wouldn't be able to. After looking around the room, he took in a deep breath and resolutely turned around, silently leaving the capital in the middle of the night. Back to the U residence. His eldest grandson, UUNB, had not returned home for an entire afternoon. The steward had sent people to the places where the young master would normally go, but they had still found nothing. When the steward reported this matter to his master, Yu Shuriwa, this old man sitting in the academy, seemed to have aged a great deal in a single afternoon. Got it, the housekeeper said weakly and left the room in silence. Soon after, there was the sound of things being smashed. This noise persisted for a long time, and then the room fell silent once more. By the time Yu Shuriwa walked out of the study, he was dressed in his official robes. Prepare a carriage to go to the Imperial Palace. Yu Shuriwa came to the Imperial Palace in the middle of the night and requested to see the Emperor. Zhu Qiyu, who had been busy with court affairs this entire time, did not immediately see him. Instead, Chief Eunuch Jin Ing stepped forward and used the excuse that the Emperor was tired and had already gone to bed to refuse. During the day, UUMB had transferred several dozen experts from the embroidered uniform guard who were close to the Yu clan. While he might have been able to conceal it from others, he truly could not hide it from the eyes of Chief Eunuch Jin Ing. But considering that Yu Shuriwa was someone the Emperor trusted, he did not stop him and instead reported the matter to acting sect master Zhu Qiyu. Beloved official Yu, what are you doing? Do you know where those people went? Zhu Qiyu was stunned. The embroidered uniform guards could be said to be the Emperor's personal army, and they were directly under his jurisdiction. Someone had reached their hands into the embroidered uniform guards. Even if that person was a trusted courtier, as the Emperor, he would naturally feel displeased. Jin Ing organized her thoughts, then answered carefully, "Those people went outside the city, towards the south of the city." Oh. Zhu Qiyu seemed to have thought of something when she heard this. Then, she waved her hand as if she was not going to pursue the matter any further. To the side, Jin Ing naturally wouldn't say anything. She could see that the Emperor might have some feelings towards this loyal duke. She thought it would be good for someone else to knock some sense into him. The Emperor didn't care, but that didn't mean Jin Ing didn't care. As a close official of the Emperor, there were many things that he needed to prepare for a rainy day. He couldn't just send people to investigate when something happened and the Emperor asked him what happened, right? That kind of subject was not qualified and could not become a favored subject. Jin Ing sent someone to wait until nightfall before news came back. The person who sent the person didn't see anything, but they smelled the scent of blood and found the scene of the murder. According to the report of an experienced spy from the East Factory, there had probably been a fierce battle and many people had died. People have died? A bloody battle? Jin Ing formed an image in her mind. Then, she shook her head. Now, no one had come to the Imperial Palace to see the Emperor. From the looks of it, that loyal duke should be fine. If Yang Qindong was fine, then Yu Shuriwa would be the only one at a disadvantage. She had a rough idea of what had happened. That night, Yu Shuriwa appeared. After knowing that his request to see the Emperor was fruitless, this Minister of Justice, an important official of the current court, and one of the representatives of the scholar officials group, actually knelt down with a plop in front of Jin Ing, the eunuch. Eunuch Jin, on account of my respect for you, I beg you to save my grandson. In the eyes of others, a eunuch was a hermaphrodite. Even if he had some power, it was difficult for him to enter the eyes of an important official. But now, Yue, who usually didn't even need to kneel when seeing the emperor, was kneeling in front of Jining. At this moment, Jining felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. Look, this was the so-called scholar officials. This was the so-called orthodox scholar officials. Now, wasn't he willing to kneel in front of a eunuch? But this feeling was fleeting. Jining quickly reached out to help Yue up. Official Yue, what are you doing? This eunuch is just a eunuch, someone who serves the emperor. How can I receive such a great gift? You can. This time, my grandson has done something foolish. I'm afraid his life will be in danger. Eunuch Jean, please go find the loyal duke and ask him to release him. As for the conditions, this old man will agree. I will agree to all of them, Yue said with tears streaming down his face. Yunb was his most favored grandson. Now that his son had failed to live up to expectations, the Yu family would have to rely on him in the future. Nothing could happen to him. Oh, loyal duke. What happened? Jining asked, knowing full well. It's a long story. Yue sighed deeply. Then, he told Jining about how his eldest grandson, Yunb, had been brooding over the death of his third grandson, Yu Xiong. Then he said, the young man is hot-blooded and has begged this old man to make trouble for the loyal duke many times. But this old man prioritized the overall situation of the imperial court and naturally did not allow it. Who knew that he would secretly take action and bring people to make trouble for the loyal duke? And he hasn't returned yet. He must be at the Yang family manor in the southern part of the city. Eunuch Jean has a lot of face, so please help me save my grandson. The Yu clan will never forget such a great favor. After saying this, Yu was about to kneel again. Jining quickly stopped him. Lord Yu, don't be anxious. This is not a small matter. Please allow this eunuch to consider it carefully. Eunuch Jean, please help this old man. In the future, this old man will follow Eunuch Jin's lead. Seeing that Jining seemed to be hesitating, Yu was afraid that the other party would reject him, so he immediately made a heavy promise. The promise of a second-rank official was extremely important. Even Jining had to weigh the weight of this promise. He nodded and said, all right, let this eunuch think about it carefully. It's late today. Tomorrow, we'll go to the Yang family manor and ask for him. Jining couldn't refuse the loyalty of a minister, so he finally agreed. At this point, Yu also let out a long sigh of relief. Although he really wanted to go save his grandson now, the other party had already agreed. It wouldn't be good to rush him and make him unhappy. Yu left in the end. At this moment, he was looking forward to the arrival of dawn more than anyone else. However, for Yunb, he had the same feeling. Every day felt like a year. He was used to being high and mighty. Even when he ate and dressed in the manor, he had servants to wait on him. But now he was being hung up. The fear caused his nerves to be constantly tense. In addition, he had been shot and had lost a lot of blood. It didn't take long for him to feel sleepy. Every time this happened, there would be a loud noise by his ear, or cold water would be splashed on him, preventing him from falling asleep. Under this torment, Yunb's thoughts entered a muddle-headed state. When someone asked him about it, he blurted out a lot of things in a daze. Even he himself didn't know what he was talking about when he said those things subconsciously. That's enough. Have you written it all down? Yang Lu, who was in charge of the interrogation, looked at the member of Cold Front who cooperated with him. I've written it all down. The member of Cold Front who passed the stenographer test put down his pen with a sense of accomplishment. Then, he looked at Yang Lu with a bright smile. He probably also knew that with what Yunb had said, the so-called Great Ming Dynasty's Minister of Justice, Yu would definitely die. Okay, let's go see the young master. Yang Lu's eyes were also filled with excitement, as if he had done something great. Not long after, a few figures quietly left Yang Village. Not long after, the information they carried was sent to the Security Bureau in the capital. Then, it was distributed to the residences of several important officials in the imperial court. Who residents? There was no court session today. Hu Ming woke up very early. Perhaps it was because he was old and didn't sleep as much, or perhaps it was because he felt that something was going to happen. Hu Ming didn't know what exactly happened yesterday, but his son was one of the officials of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. Naturally, he knew a little about the Embroidered Uniform Guard and the East Military Depot moving people out of the city. Moreover, based on his many years of experience, he believed that this matter had something to do with his grandson-in-law. Hu Ming didn't know how to evaluate Yang Qindong. He was young, talented, knowledgeable in military affairs and business. He had relied on himself to win the title of Duke before the age of 20. Even when the Great Ming was founded, no one had been able to do such a thing. Just from these aspects alone, this grandson-in-law was very satisfactory. With this sort of in-law, the Hu clan would have no worries for at least several decades. Moreover, from the information he had gathered from various sources, his relationship with his granddaughter Yen'er was extremely good. The husband and wife respected each other and loved each other very much. It was impossible to find any fault with this. This sort of grandson-in-law could be said to be 1 in 10,000 or even 1 in 100,000. It was precisely because he was too young that he showed off his ability. Because of his great achievements, he had earned the emperor's suspicion, and he had repeatedly offended others in the imperial court, becoming the target of public criticism several times. At first, Hu Shao thought that Yang Qindong had done this on purpose. He didn't want to have a good relationship with the important officials in the imperial court, so that he could tell Daizong Zhu Qiyu that he didn't have the intention of starting a faction, and that he didn't want to form a small faction. You can rest assured. With this thought, Hu Ming was greatly relieved, believing that this was the result of him becoming an official. His many years of experience in the imperial court told him that imperial favor was vast and mighty, but imperial favor could also make a person fall from heaven to hell. Chapter 328. As time passed, this impression slowly changed, and Hu Shao began to have more thoughts. This grandson-in-law did not make friends with important officials not because he wanted to clear his name, nor was it to show off to others. It seemed that he truly did not want to make friends with them, and even seemed to look down on these important officials. As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Hu Shao was given a fright. He had seen many arrogant people, and there were countless people who thought they were talented when they were young. Because they were too smart, they always looked down on others. Such people were lonely. However, this kind of thinking was not desirable, because reality would tell them that if they did not work together and rely on others, they would never be able to do anything. However, in Yang Qindong's eyes, this was not the case. He was an expert who could do things without relying on others. For example, the establishment of the immortal abode and heavens beyond heaven did not rely on other factions. Yang Bao's establishment was even before he had made a name for himself. Later on, the Yang family bank became a hot topic, and its influence spread far and wide without anyone's help. Even Hu Shao, an elder who was related to him by blood, did not even ask for help. Yet he had done these things. Not only that, he had done so well. Even though he had been suppressed a while ago, he had managed to survive without any major chaos. He was an oddity among oddities, yet he could do everything well. Even if Hu Shao wanted to find fault with him, or even lecture him as an elder, he could not find a suitable reason. This made Hu Shao feel vexed. Perhaps it was because he had seen too many beneficial things in his life. Back when Yang Qindong wanted to marry his granddaughter, he had thought that Yang Qindong wanted to borrow his power. At the time, it was not just him. Many people thought this way as well. Yang Qindong wanted to borrow his power. So how could Hu Shao not think the same? If the Hu clan wanted to develop, if they wanted to have good fortune, and if they wanted to continue, they also needed a strong alliance. In addition, his granddaughter, Hu Yin, was also very fond of this marriage, so he had agreed after deep thought. For this reason, Hu knew how many people in the capital envied him. However, all of this changed on the day of their wedding. On the same day, Yang Qindong not only married Hu Yin, but also took in 3 concubines. Even though he had said that he had discussed this matter with the Hu clan, only Hu Shao knew that he had been completely unaware of this matter from beginning to end. This was tantamount to slapping his old face, but he couldn't say anything about it. He couldn't tell others that he didn't know anything. If he did, wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face? He suppressed the anger in his heart, thinking that in the future, when Yang Qindong came to ask him for help, he must give him a good beating. He had waited for such an opportunity for a long time, but Yang Qindong had never once asked him for it. On the contrary, they would send a lot of priceless gifts during festivals. Because of this, the Hu clan became even more prosperous. Some of the younger generation and side branches in the bureaucracy naturally benefited from this. They no longer needed to rack their brains and rely on their positions and power to do things they didn't want to do. On the contrary, this allowed them to establish themselves more upright and flourish in the bureaucracy. Normally, an official clan would have the support of a large financial group behind them. However, there was no one like Yang Qindong, who only gave and didn't ask for anything in return. As a result, the Hu clan could do things more openly. Even if an enemy wanted to make trouble for them, it would be difficult for them to find a reason. Because of their selflessness, many of the Hu clan's officials were more upright. With just a little bit of effort, it wasn't difficult for them to rise up the ranks. The eldest son, Hu Changning, had also been promoted because of Yang Qindong, and now he had even caught the emperor's eye. All of this was because of Yang Qindong's help. Over time, the Hu clan no longer treated Yang Qindong as a junior who relied on the shade of a large tree. Instead, they viewed him as a colossus on the same level as them. Changes were constantly occurring, and Hu Xiao began to place more of his attention on this matter. Giving without receiving anything in return would always make people feel uneasy, and this made them even more concerned. Naturally, the imperial court would protect Yang Qindong's interests. This was the only thing Hu Xiao could do. It could be considered a return for what he had received. When yesterday's incident came out, and it happened in the southern part of the city, Hu Xiao couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with his grandson-in-law. If it had something to do with him, why hadn't there been any news yet? Could it be a small matter? But since the embroidered uniform guards had made a move first, and the Eastern Palace guards had made a move later, how could it be a small matter? Hu Xiao, who hadn't slept well the entire night, was puzzled. Finally, he heard footsteps behind him. "Ninger, why don't you sleep a little longer?" Hearing the footsteps, he knew that his eldest son, Hu Changning, had arrived. Hu Xiao slowly turned his head, and a kind expression appeared on his face. "Father, there's news." Hu Changning didn't answer. In reality, he had been awakened by a sudden incident. When the city gates opened in the morning, the security bureau had brought over a set of documents. He hadn't woken up yet, but when he saw the documents and records in his hands, all his sleepiness disappeared, and he hurried over to find his father. Hu Xiao's expression didn't change, but his hand had already reached out, indicating that he valued this matter. As the documents fell into his hands, he slowly read them. Finally, his expression changed. Sensing that his father was digesting the contents of the documents, Hu Changning carefully said, "The person who came is Chun Dong's trusted aide. He also sent over a handwritten letter. Give it to me." Just as he was thinking about the importance of this matter, Hu Xiao didn't hold back when his son said this. He reached out again, and a letter was unfolded in front of him. Hu Changning read the letter word by word. After a while, he closed the letter and slowly closed his eyes. The documents recorded evidence of the crimes of the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiriyue. Attached were some questions that his eldest grandson, Yu Yuanbi, had personally explained. Yu Yuanbi was Yu Shiriyue's successor, and because of this identity, he was usually involved in many core and confidential matters. One of them was only known to his own family. Yu Shiriyue had secretly sent someone to contact Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect, who was in the south. The general idea was that once something happened to the Dai sect, he would seek refuge there. This idea of having a foot in two boats wasn't wrong. In fact, it was the right choice in troubled times. However, the problem was that some things could be done, but others couldn't know about it. Once others found out, those who wholeheartedly wanted to serve two masters would often end up empty-handed, or even lose their heads. As a ruler, he could tolerate the selfishness of his subjects and seek benefits for himself. However, this kind of behavior that didn't completely submit to him was absolutely intolerable. When Hu Xiao saw this, he knew that Yu Shiriyue wouldn't be able to get past this obstacle. The result of touching the dragon's reverse scale was obvious. Hu Shao didn't speak for a long time. Hu Changning, who was beside him, carefully asked, "Father, this is the minister of the imperial court. Why is Chen Dong forcing him to his death?" Hu Changning hadn't seen Yang Qindong's private letter before, so he naturally didn't know the reason. His thoughts were still stuck on the idea that since they were all important officials in the imperial court, it would be better to cover up for each other and find a good relationship. Beating someone to death like this would only make others wary of you and alienate you. This wasn't what a wise person would do. When Hu Shao heard the question, he let out a long sigh and said, "Go take a look for yourself. Your son-in-law wants to go south to take a look. He's killing the chicken to warn the monkey before he leaves, reminding everyone. No, it should be said that he's directly killing the monkey." In the morning at Yang Village, an unexpected guest arrived. The head eunuch, the official most trusted by the emperor, the head eunuch and head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Jin Ing, had arrived. Yang Qindong naturally knew why Jin Ing had come so early in the morning. After meeting Jin Ing in the side hall, without waiting for him to speak, the documents that had been sent to Hu Zhao's residence were placed on the table. When Jin Ing picked them up one by one and read through them, especially when it was written that Yu Shiyue had privately contacted Zhu Qizhen and expressed his loyalty. It was also written that the correspondence was in a secret room in Yu Shiyue's study. Jin Ying's face burned with anger. Originally, he had come with the intention of interceding on Yu Shiyue's behalf. Everyone was in the imperial court and would see each other frequently, so it was good for everyone. Most importantly, he had the loyalty of a minister. With his position at the emperor's side, he would play a crucial role. But now, he didn't dare to say anything, much less ask for mercy. Being at Zhu Qiyu's side, Jin Ing naturally knew what the emperor liked and disliked. Yu Shiyue's two-mindedness was already intolerable to Daizong. In other words, Yu Shiyue had been abandoned from this moment on. Next would be the extermination of his family. At this moment, interceding on Jin Ying's behalf was an unwise act. Jin Ing was so smart. Why would he speak up? This Yu Shiyue is really hateful. Duke of loyalty and courage, don't worry. With these things, I will immediately send people to search a manor. I will definitely punish him severely. He gritted his teeth and looked angry. At this moment, Jin Ying's performance was perfect. Those who didn't know would never have thought that he was still thinking about offending Yu Shiyue when he came. Jin Ying's attitude was completely within Yang Qindong's expectations. Then let's report this to the emperor and handle it. With just one sentence, Yang Qindong also expressed his thoughts. He would not suppress this matter. Even if Jin Ing wanted to cover up for Yu Shiyue, he would announce everything to the public. At that time, it would only implicate even more people who spoke up for the Yu family. After knowing Yang Qindong's attitude, Jin Ing understood that there was no turning back. However, he was even more curious. With these things in his hands, if it were him, he would have many options. For example, he could threaten Yu Shiyue and then use him for his own purposes. But why did Yang Qindong insist on making the matter public and putting Yu Shiyue to death? Chapter 329. Did he not know that this would easily cause the other officials to panic? After all, who hadn't done something wrong before? If that was the case, it would arouse everyone's vigilance and even cause them to band together in opposition. Wouldn't that mean that their future path would become narrower and narrower? Jin Ing had far too many questions. Fortunately, Yang Qindong spread out his words and gave an explanation that made the other party feel a sense of sudden realization. Eunuch Jin, my deceased father's birthday, is approaching. Last year was supposed to be the 10th anniversary of his death, but the Walla army truly was present, so we were unable to leave. Fortunately, the situation of the country has stabilized, and this duke has received His Majesty's great favor and has been granted the title of loyal and courageous. But in reality, I have been granted a fief of Janning residence. Thinking about it, it's been so long since I've brought Madam to see it, so it's best to end this matter together, Yang Qindong said in a rather sorrowful tone, his eyes seeming to be reminiscing about something. Speaking of which, Jin Ing also knew Yang Rong. Strictly speaking, They had spent a long time in the same court. And now that Yang Qindong was speaking of filial piety, Jining had nothing to say. Yes, filial piety is the foundation of a person. But which madam will the Duke of Loyal and Courageous be bringing with you? Of course, the official wife. Yang Qindong said matter-of-factly, and then he added, "That's right, there's also third madam, Lady Shui. She's always yearned for the atmosphere of the South, so this Duke promised her long ago that she would come with us." Without waiting for Jining to say anything, Yang Qindong continued, "Of course, this Duke's roots are still in the capital. This is my business, and second madam and fourth madam will remain behind to manage it. When the time comes, I ask that eunuch Jin take care of it. This Duke will be endlessly grateful." Jin Ying's expression had already become extremely nervous, but when he heard the last part, he clearly relaxed. And seeing Yang Qindong so courteous, he cupped his fist and replied, "Duke of Loyal and Courageous, please be at ease. But if there's anything you need, you can order someone to come find this Duke. I will do my best." Many thanks, many thanks." Yang Qindong cupped his fist in thanks, and the two seemed to have a very pleasant conversation. About an hour later, Jining left Yangjia village. What was different from when he came was that there were a few more banknotes in his bosom, totaling up to 200,000 taels. Come to think of it, almost every time Jining came to Yang Qindong, as long as she wasn't looking for trouble, she would receive many benefits. Moreover, she would receive many benefits. From this, it could be seen that Yang Qindong knew how to conduct himself. The carriages left the Yang Qindong manor. Jining, who was in the carriage, slowly closed her eyes. Her mind was filled with what Yang Qindong had just said. Now that she had a clear understanding of what had happened, Jining didn't know how to describe Yueyu's actions. After thinking about it for a long time, he could only think of one word, and that was overestimating himself. Just because he had lost a round in the previous battle, he had been brooding over it. Now that he finally had the chance, he wanted to kill the other party. If things weren't done beautifully, and you weren't prepared enough, and the worst thing was that what you were doing wasn't clean, what kind of ending would happen to you is already destined. This was why Yang Qindong had angrily attacked. But now, it seemed that this person had a sense of propriety. Not only had he targeted Yu Shuriwei, he had also produced ample evidence. At the same time, he had stated that he would be leaving the capital for a period of time. This was clearly to alleviate the pressure and influence of this matter on the officials. At the very least, Jining was in favor of Yang Qindong leaving for a period of time. At this time, the army was being mobilized and the imperial power was being tightened. With Yang Qindong around, it gave people a sense of awe, and without him, many things would go much more smoothly. Moreover, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had said that this would be his base. When he left, he would only take the first madam and third madam, leaving the second madam and fourth madam behind as hostages. In this way, there was no need to worry that he would do anything to harm Biming. With this thought in mind, Jin Ying's complexion improved, and her lips naturally curved into a smile. In the imperial palace of the capital, although there was no court session today, the temporary emperor was still extremely busy. Many memorials awaited his approval, and many important matters of state and military required his final decision. Perhaps this was the emperor's mission. He was destined to toil for the rest of his life. However, even if that was the case, many people only saw the scene of him grasping great power and controlling life and death in his hands. They did not see how much he had paid for it, and how much happiness he should have given up in his life. In Celestial Worship Palace, Zhu Qiyu was burying his head in a small mountain of memorials, his face occasionally calm and occasionally tinged with anger. There were quite a few minor eunuchs in the hall. They carefully stood there, their bodies slightly bowed as if they were ready to receive orders at any time. But they truly did not dare to make the slightest noise, as if they were afraid of alarming the emperor and incurring the wrath of the dragon. Then, footsteps came from outside the hall. When all the eunuchs' expressions became more respectful, Zhu Qiyu, who was immersed in his work, slowly raised his head. After a casual glance, He continued to read the memorials in his hands. He said, "Official Jean has returned. Long live the Emperor! Long live the Emperor!" As usual, after Jeaning knelt and paid her respects, she stood up and carefully walked to the front. She walked to Zhu Qiyu's side and said softly, "Your Majesty, there's been a change in the situation." Zhu Qiyu seemed to have heard her, but also seemed not to have heard her. At least, he did not do anything out of the ordinary. But Jeaning, who was used to serving him, knew that Zhu Qiyu had completely listened. She continued in a small voice, "Your Majesty, Yu Shiyue is suspected of treason." As if suddenly awakened, Zhu Qiyu abruptly turned his head. He glared fiercely at Jeaning and said, "Qing, say that again." Jeaning knelt on the ground with a thump. As if she was frightened, she continued, "Your Majesty, Yu Shiyue has secretly contacted Zhu Qizhan of the Ying sect. He has the intention to submit." Bastard! When he heard Zhu Qizhan's name, Zhu Qiyu's expression was clearly furious. But no one knew whether he was scolding Jeaning or Yu Shiyue. Because of Zhu Qiyu's anger, the temperature in Fengtian Hall seemed to have dropped. The other eunuchs bowed even lower. At this moment, it was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. After about 3 or 4 breaths, Zhu Qiyu seemed to have adjusted his state of mind. His voice was no longer as frightening as before. Perhaps he had slowly begun to digest this news. "We have treated Yu Qing well. How could he do such a thing? Do you have sufficient evidence for this? This subject has just returned from Yang Village. Everything was told by the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. I heard it from Yu Shiyue's eldest grandson, Yu Yunbi. It should not be false. But after all, this involves the position of minister." This subject did not dare to make any rash comments and did not send anyone to obtain evidence. "Send someone to get it. We want to see the evidence. We want to see the evidence." Zhu Qiyu's voice grew louder and louder, as if his anger was rising. "Yes, this subject will send someone to do so. Your Majesty must take care of your health." Seeing that Zhu Qiyu was in a fit of rage, Jeaning knew that no matter what he said now, the other party would not believe him. He spoke as he retreated. He was not afraid. He just wanted to give the Emperor time and space to digest this news. The Emperor was also a person. He also had emotions. The so-called not showing his emotions, usually referred to in front of outsiders, such as eunuchs. Usually, Zhu Qiyu would not fake it. Jeaning was well aware of this. That was why he retreated to give the Emperor time to adjust. Of course, he also needed to obtain the evidence. Yu Manor. A night had passed. They had sent out all the men they could, but there were still no clues. At this time, as the master of the manor, the current Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue, did not dare to have any expectations. He could only place everything on Jeaning. He hoped that this chief eunuch still had some face and could get Zhang's son Yuanbi back from the hands of the Duke of Loyalty. As for what kind of price he would have to pay, he was already prepared to be bitten. The entire manor became gloomy because of Yu Shiyue's mood. The servants walked carefully, as if they were afraid of doing something wrong and being caught in the crossfire. Many things could happen just because you did not want them to. Just like the Yu residents at this moment, although everyone was already very careful, what happened next still caught them off guard. A large number of embroidered uniform guards with embroidered spring sabers suddenly appeared. They quickly rushed into the residence and blocked the main passages in the courtyard. "What's going on? What's going on?" Yu Shiyue, who was sitting in the study waiting for Jeaning to send him news, felt the chaos outside. He stood up and looked outside with a nervous and confused expression. "Old Master, the embroidered uniform guards are here. They surrounded this place and said they want to search the house." After the chief eunuch pushed open the door to the study without permission, he stumbled and spoke in an unclear voice. "Get out of my way." Before the chief eunuch could explain the situation clearly, the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Ji Guang, who was dressed in a flying fish robe, followed behind him. When he saw that the chief eunuch still wanted to say something, he raised his leg and kicked him to the ground. "How dare you, Ji Guang? What are you doing? Don't think that just because you're from the embroidered uniform guards, I can't punish you." I'm going to report this to the emperor. Seeing her servant being beaten in front of her, how could Yu Shuriwei, who had always been pampered and held a high position, tolerate it? She raised her voice and reprimanded loudly, as if she wanted to put a lot of pressure on the other party. Chapter 330. Yu Shuriwei was the Minister of Justice. With the abolition of the cabinet, the Minister of Justice could answer directly to the emperor. He was the highest-ranking official. In addition, he was promoted by the substitute emperor, Zhu Qiyu, and was deeply trusted. He also had a good relationship with the other ministers. Even Jining was considered one of his own. With such an environment, such popularity, and such a network of connections, it was no wonder that Yu Shuriwei still dared to question the embroidered uniform guards loudly with an expression of condemnation. However, Yu Shuriwei was too agitated. He didn't think about it. Without orders from above, how could the brocade guard dare to make a move on an important official like him? Since they were here, they must have been on the emperor's orders. Ji Guang looked at Yu Shuriwei, who was jumping up and down, as if he was looking at a clown. He shook his head disdainfully. Lord Yu, this official only knows that I'm here to investigate under orders. Please cooperate. As for whether you want to lodge a complaint or not, it's up to you. Men, search. As his voice fell, he waved his hand, and several embroidered uniform guards behind him rushed into the study like wolves and tigers. Then, according to the information they had received, they quickly found the secret door. The mechanism moved, and a secret compartment appeared. A few well-preserved letters were displayed in front of everyone. These letters were evidence of Yu Shuriwei's private contact with Zhu Qijin of Insect. Logically speaking, they should be destroyed. However, Yu Shuriwei wanted to keep a copy. If there was a day when he had no way out and went to the south, at least it would be a testimony that he had been considered a member of Insect for a long time. This evidence could have given him another life of glory and wealth. At this moment, it had become the driving force for him to go to hell. Therefore, when he saw these letters appear and was about to be taken by the brocade guard, he went crazy. He rushed forward like a madman, wanting to snatch them back and destroy them. Ji Guang, who had long been prepared for this move, simply grabbed his shoulder with his large hand and said in a joking tone, Lord Yu, what are you trying to do? Could it be that you really have something to hide? Yu Shuriwei knew that it was impossible for him to take it by force when he felt the large hand holding him down like an iron clamp. Immediately, he changed into another face and said to Ji Guang, Lord Ji, I'll return it to you. I'll give you whatever you want. I can give you all of my property. It's priceless. How about it? At this moment, Yu Shuriwei seemed to want to bribe Ji Guang. From the looks of it, this was the only way to go. Otherwise, once these letters were sent to Dai Zone, it was easy to imagine what would happen to them. Who wouldn't be tempted by such priceless wealth? If it was a private investigation, there might be some unforeseen circumstances. But this time, there were so many embroidered uniform guards, and they were acting under the emperor's orders. How could Ji Guang dare to make any mistakes? Looking at Yu Shuriwei, who was begging for mercy, he shook his head coldly. Lord Yu, if you knew this would happen, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. Hey, someone come. Take Lord Yu away and keep an eye on him. Don't let him commit suicide. Yes, a few tall and sturdy embroidered uniform guards walked over and wrapped Yu Shuriwei up. Immediately, the entire Yu residence fell into a state of chaos. The movements in the Yu residence naturally couldn't be hidden from the other officials. In line with the idea that the fox grieves for the rabbit's death, and in line with the principle that without the lips, the teeth would feel cold, Governor Shi Hung, Minister of War Yi Ming, Minister of Revenue Jin Lian, Minister of Works Shi Pu, and the other officials hurried to the palace. Although they didn't know what exactly happened, they more or less guessed that it had something to do with the Duke of Loyalty. They couldn't understand why the emperor would help others deal with them. Thus, they all thought about what to say when they saw the emperor and how to dissuade him from doing something that would hurt those close to him and make his enemies happy. The group of officials quickly arrived outside the throne room, but they weren't immediately received by the emperor. Instead, when they stood outside the room, they could hear the angry roars coming from inside the room. At this moment, The expressions of the officials who came to plead for leniency were very unsightly. All of them exchanged glances. They all thought that the situation was serious. It seemed that the emperor was truly angry, and the situation was difficult to turn around. After about an hour, the movements in the hall grew quieter and quieter. Not long after, the chief eunuch, Jining, walked out. Where her gaze fell on the officials, she sighed softly and said, "Everyone, please come in. The emperor wants to see you." Just from Jining's expression, it could be seen that the situation wasn't good. However, now was not the time to ask about things. The officials immediately entered the throne room and saw Zhu Qiyu, who still had a furious expression on his face, glaring angrily at them from his dragon throne. Just from that gaze, the officials felt that the atmosphere wasn't right. Even so, they still forced themselves to kneel on the ground and loudly shouted, "Long live the emperor." In the past, after greeting each other, Zhu Qiyu would say, "Rise," and everyone would rise. However, this time, he didn't say anything. The officials could only kneel there, unable to rise. Time seemed to stop here. There was no sound in the hall. Under this kind of atmosphere, the officials kneeling on the ground didn't dare to raise their heads to look. It was as if they were afraid of angering the emperor. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Then, there was the sound of rushing wind. Following that, letters were thrown through the air and landed at the feet of the kneeling officials. Take a look. These are the so-called loyal officials. They received my trust and were entrusted with important tasks. Now they turn around and do such a rebellious thing. They're truly unworthy of being an official. Unworthy of being an official. Do you still want to plead for mercy on his behalf? Could it be that you are the same as him and have done such a rebellious thing? The letters flew everywhere. Soon, the officials reached out to pick them up. After glancing at them, they felt their scalps go numb. This was a letter that Emperor Ingzong had personally written to Yu Shuriwei. The officials could be considered old officials under Zhu Qizhen. Naturally, they wouldn't mistake the emperor's calligraphy. Knowing what this was, they also understood why Zhu Qiyu was so angry. They also understood that this time, Yu Shuriwei really couldn't be saved. As an official, wanting to serve two masters was originally intolerable. Not to mention that his weakness had fallen into the hands of others. If he didn't die, who would die? The result was clear at a glance. No one was willing to say anything for Yu Shuriwei. On the contrary, everyone was thinking about how to make Zhu Qiyu believe them. They didn't want to be affected by this matter. Naturally, among the kneeling officials, there were also some who were like Yu Shuriwei. They had secretly sent messages to Zhu Qizhen. In the end, it was just to be safer. But those who did so were now covered in cold sweat. There were even some who learned from Yu Shuriwei and privately sent messages. They were already thinking that the first thing they would do when they returned home was to burn the letters. They didn't want to leave any evidence. None of the officials dared to say anything. One by one, they kowtowed to the ground and shouted that they were guilty. It was as if they wanted to repent and repent. Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, looked at this scene very seriously. He was very clear in his heart. He was afraid that even among these kneeling officials, there would still be some who were half-hearted. However, he couldn't kill them all. He had to give the imperial order, but in the end he still needed to rely on them to do the actual work. If he killed whoever he suspected, wouldn't that mean he would become a commander without an army? However, since there were signs of something happening, he was unwilling to let it go so easily. This was the reason why he was doing this, to intimidate the enemy. Although Yu Shuriwei's betrayal made him burn with anger, it wasn't to this extent. After all, he was only a minister of justice. After killing him, there would be more suitable people to step forward. But he still pretended to be so angry in front of all the officials. It was to tell everyone that if anyone dared to do this in the future, the consequences would be severe. Seeing that everyone was saying that he was guilty, Zhu Qiyu felt the strength of imperial power. He felt that at this moment, his aura of a monarch could finally shake the world. Not only did you have to be ruthless and arbitrary in governing a country, but you also had to be humble. Blindly suppressing people for a long time would only lead to more backlash. This wasn't what a wise person would do. In the next breath, Emperor Dai Zong changed his face and said, "Officials, you may rise. I know that you are all loyal officials, completely different from you Shuriyue. In the future, the great Ming dynasty will need to rely on us to govern together. Give a carrot after a stick." This set of extremely ancient governance methods was universal at any time. Just like now, after hearing Zhu Qiyu's words, all the officials in the throne room shed tears of gratitude. They kept praising the emperor's wisdom, saying that Daizong was the #1 emperor in all of history, and so on. After a wave of praise, it was time to do the actual thing. Many people criticized Yu Shuriyue on the spot. There were even people who directly said that such an impure official should be beheaded in public as a warning. Of course, Yu Shuriyue had to be killed. Not only that, they had to make a big scene as a warning to those officials who also had second thoughts. Zhu Qiyu had a clear understanding of this point. Of course, he approved the officials' requests. He also said that the Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Court, and the embroidered uniform guard would jointly investigate and announce his evil deeds to the world as a warning to everyone. Among the officials who pleaded for leniency, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Su Yozhen, was among them. He was probably the one who benefited the most out of these people. He took this opportunity to finally take a step forward and take over the Ministry of Justice's position. Even though he hadn't been promoted to the position of Minister of Justice yet, from the looks of it, it wouldn't be long before that day came. At this moment, while he was excited, he also felt a sense of fear towards the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong. He was able to get to where he was today because of his hard work, but more of it was because of Yang Chendong's plan. Now that he was finally going to obtain power, Su Yozhen's first thought was to be obedient. Otherwise, who knew if today's Yu Shuriyue would be him tomorrow? Chapter 331. Zhu Qiyu was very satisfied with the performance of the officials and left happily. Leaving behind the 3 officials, the group of 5 discussed as they left the hall. Su Yozhen's side was even livelier. Shi Heng, Shi Pu, Yiming, Jin Lian, and the others naturally gathered around him, congratulating him one after another. Su Yozhen accepted them one by one. He didn't mind building a good relationship with these people, and he believed that Yang Chendong would also be happy to see this. It was as if he had entered the tiger's den. Yu Shuriyue's matter seemed to have been settled. With that handwritten letter as evidence, no one would be able to reverse the situation. Since they couldn't shake him, everyone chose to draw a clear line between them and hid him while he was down. In a short period of time, more and more of Yu Shuriyue's crimes were revealed to the public. Even the family members of the guilty official, Li Wenxiao, were dug up, and evidence of Yu Shuriyue's crimes were brought out. But relatively speaking, this was just a stone in the well. After his private contact with Zhu Qizhen was exposed, his fate was already sealed. From Yu Xiong's death to Yu Shuriyue's imprisonment, it had only been a few months since the Yu clan's defeat. Anyone who knew the inside story knew that while it was one thing to seek death, it was more to do with loyalty. For a moment, Yang Chendong couldn't help but become the target of public criticism. Fortunately, he had already prepared a countermeasure. At this moment, he was packing up his things and preparing to leave the capital. Yu Shuriyue's case was in its final stages. With the tacit approval of Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu, the consequences could already be imagined. Yu Yuanbi was also released by Yang Chendong. The pitiful young master thought that he could be saved, but he didn't expect that as soon as he arrived at the Yongding Gate, he would be captured by the constables of the Ministry of Justice who used to smile at him. These constables, who used to look up to Yu Yuanbi when they saw him, suddenly changed their expressions as if they were fiends who had walked out from the depths of hell. With such a huge matter and the collapse of a minister, Yang Chendong knew that he had to leave the capital. Otherwise, if he continued to stay here, who knew how many people would be concerned about him? Although he had Lung Feng by his side, and his safety wouldn't be a problem for the time being, it was hard to predict what would happen if a string was stretched too taut. He would never do something as stupid as putting himself in the center of a whirlpool. When the matter was done, he left with a flick of his sleeve, concealing his achievements and fame. This was what a wise man should do. Fortunately, the acting ancestor emperor already knew about his departure, and judging from his attitude, he was very much in favor of it. No matter what, Yang Qindong's existence was a kind of pressure. Although he couldn't see it, he could feel it. If this person could leave for a while, not only would the influence of Yu Shiyue's incident fade, but it would also allow the emperor to do more things without any distractions. With the emperor's tacit approval, the news that Yang Qindong would be leaving for a period of time was made public in a Yang family manner. First, it was the Yang Family Academy, where the first batch of students was about to graduate. Originally, there were a total of 101 students, including Junko, but only 48 of them were able to persist until the end. There was no lack of outstanding students who were eliminated at the very end. Although less than half of them had graduated, Yang Qindong was still extremely satisfied. He was extremely concerned about their placement, even going so far as to speak with each of the 48 students to understand their thoughts and make the most appropriate arrangements. For example, Feng Ku, who had once been a destitute scholar, was extremely intelligent and quick-witted. He was often very interested in the topics Yang Qindong taught in his classes, especially physics and chemistry, and the things that people regarded as craftsmen. He was able to deduce many things from one example. In the Great Ming Dynasty, scholar officials and the emperor ruled the world together, and Confucianism was the most sacred. Only scholars, who spoke of the etiquette of sages, were regarded as above men. In comparison, even generals who were skilled in war were inferior. And this was even less true of craftsmen. With this sort of hobby, one was destined to have no better future. Because of this, Feng Ku had been distressed more than once. Now that Yang Qindong was here, everything was different. When Yang Qindong asked Feng Ku to come to the study for a private talk, Feng Ku told him that there was a place where craftsmen enjoyed high status and had a good environment, as well as many unimaginable experimental instruments. Before Yang Qindong could say anything, Feng Ku expressed his willingness to go. He even said that as long as he could realize what he had learned and imagined, he was willing to go no matter how desolate that place was. In this way, Feng Ku was arranged to go to Qiqian City, where he would first be assigned to work in the arsenal. As for his future development, it would depend on his personal ability. Chang Qianhao, the son of the Chang family from Jiangnan. He was very proficient in business. After many days of learning, Yang Qindong used his personal charm to infect this person, making him one of his staunch followers. This time, he would follow Yang Qindong to the south. If there was a chance, he would naturally expand the Yang family's business. Although Tai Qingyi and Jiang Ping were women, their martial arts foundation was very good. After half a year of learning, they performed well in all aspects and were left to be the bodyguards of the madams. In the study, Yang Qindong took out two seemingly very small Browning women's pistols. Both Tai Qingyi and Jiang Ping had dabbled in pistols before. They had even shot targets when they were students and had good results. They had yearned for such an advanced weapon for a long time. Now that they finally had their own pistols, they were very excited. There was also Wang Si, because his grandfather was the current Minister of Personnel and was in charge of the promotion and evaluation of all the officials in the world. He had an important position. Yang Qindong kept him and let him become a teacher in the Yang Clan Academy to continue his teaching and nurture more talents that could be used in the future. Wang Si had some objections to this. After he knew that Yang Qindong was going to the south, he wanted to go with him. His teacher had said before that it was better to travel 10,000 miles than to read 10,000 books. For this matter, Yang Qindong talked with him in private for more than 2 hours and said that this was still a test for him. As long as he passed, there would be a day when he would be released and he would be entrusted with important tasks. Wang Si didn't know what it meant to be entrusted with an important task. However, since his teacher was the one who said it, he naturally wouldn't doubt it and agreed. He also said that with him there, the Yang family village would be fine and that his teacher could leave without worry. The group of students were arranged according to their strengths and characteristics. After the matter of the academy was settled, Yang Fu, who was in charge of the Yang family's business, was also called to the Yang family village. Yang Fu was Yang Qindong's cousin. The two of them had worked together many times in Janning. The reason why Yang Qindong could be where he was today was because of the various resources provided by Yang Fu. Of course, in return, Yang Fu was now in charge of the Heavens Beyond Trading Company, the Yang family's bank, and the trade with the Northern Wall. He had great authority, and the benefits he received were also very generous. After receiving benefits, Yang Fu respected Yang Qindong even more. After being summoned, he dropped everything in his hands and rushed over. The two of them talked in the study for a long time. Then, Yang Fu left in high spirits. Not long after Yang Fu left, he returned to the capital and went to find Wu Qingbo, who was now the military governor, Shi Hong. He said that he was willing to pay a sum of money to ask the other party to send an army to protect the business. In particular, the trade with the Walla was the most important. According to Yang Qindong's intentions, once he left, Lung Feng wouldn't be able to participate too much in protecting the caravan with Walla. Due to the lack of military strength, the original company of protection troops had to be reduced to a squad. The reduction of military strength required other people to take over. Thus, he locked his gaze on Shi Hong. Yang Qindong also firmly believed that the other party would be more than happy to receive such benefits that fell from the sky. It was just as he had expected. Yang Fu took the initiative to look for him. When Shi Hong knew of his intentions, he was naturally excited. In order to express his modesty, he said that he would consider it carefully. However, after Yang Fu left for an afternoon, at night, he arranged for his trusted family member, his cousin, Shi Tong, to look for Yang Fu. In the following days, this person would be responsible for the safety of the trade caravan. He would bring 1,000 men with him. Protecting the trade caravan would not only allow him to obtain a generous amount of mercenaries, but more importantly, he could also bring in his own private goods to trade. The profits from this could be 10 times or even dozens of times more. Once this was done, Shi Hong would have more and more money at his disposal, and his influence would also grow. The matters outside were arranged one by one. To Yang Qindong, dealing with such matters was very simple. As long as his thinking was correct, it would not be difficult to do it. However, the following arrangements for the madams gave him the biggest headache. According to what Jining had said before, he could not take all of the madams with him. Taking 2 and leaving 2 behind meant that his home was still here. It could also be said that he was leaving behind hostages. First Madame Hu Yin and third Madame Shui, who were called along, were naturally happy and delighted. Second Madame Qiao Yin and fourth Madame Lady Xiang, who were not called, were naturally not in a good mood. This was especially true for Qiao Yin. She had been Yang Qindong's personal maid before and had never left the young master's side since she was young. Even during the trip to Crimson City, she had followed him all the way. Now that they were suddenly separated, it was easy to imagine how reluctant she was to part with him. For this reason, Yang Qindong accompanied Qiao Yin alone for the entire night. Under the dual attack of actions and words, Qiao Yin was finally persuaded. Not to mention actions, Qiao Yin practically spent the rest of the night begging for mercy. In terms of words, he said, "People will eventually grow up. I already have 4 madams, so I have more to take care of in terms of basic necessities. Qiao Yin does not have to be as busy as before. This separation is also for the sake of better reunion in the future." Chapter 332. Qiao Yin was a sensible woman. She was already satisfied that the young master cared for her so much, talked to her so much, and even spent an entire night with her. For a woman like her, if she were to follow another man, even if she could become a concubine, she wouldn't have any status. Furthermore, her master wouldn't be able to counsel her alone. After Qiao Yin's matter was settled, it was easier to talk to Lady Xiang. In comparison, she didn't have as deep of a relationship as Qiao Yin and Yang Qindong. She had only become the 4th madam because her admiration had turned into love. Although their relationship after marriage was very good, she was still born in the streets and had once stayed in a place like the Nine Arts Workshop. Her position was still very low. Yang Qindong only needed to persuade the great madam to come forward and speak with her before agreeing to remain in the capital. However, she still expressed a reluctance to part with Yang Chendong. For this reason, the sixth young master had to console her. After interacting with her after marriage, he found that Lady Xiang wasn't just beautiful, she was also very sensible. The two's relationship quickly warmed up. After this short separation, their feelings for each other would only deepen when they met again. The two madams who stayed in the residence were settled. Yang Chendong did one last thing. He paid a visit to the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao, and the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji. Yang Chendong went to Wang Ji's place alone, and no one knew what they talked about. However, when he left the residence, his expression was calm, so it should have gone smoothly. When he went to the Hu estate, he went with Hu Xiao. The Minister of Rights personally received him, and his eldest son, Hu Changning, accompanied him for a banquet. Hu Xiao could understand why Yang Chendong chose to leave at this time. No matter how capable a person was, they couldn't always stand at the heart of the storm. Otherwise, who knew what would happen in the storm? This step of retreating to advance was a good one. With Hu Ming's support, before Yang Chendong left, he asked Hu Ming to protect the interests of the Yang manor and the Yang family, as well as his brothers and sisters. Hu Ming naturally agreed. Since the Hu and Yang clans were already connected by marriage, they were now on the same side. As long as they didn't commit any grave mistakes, there shouldn't be any worries about their safety. The trip to the Hu and Wang clans went very smoothly, and Yang Chendong decided to leave the capital 3 days later. Yang Chendong was leaving the capital for a period of time, saying that he was going back to Lord Janning to pay respects to his ancestors. As the 11th anniversary of his late father's death was approaching, the news that he was going to sweep the grave quickly spread through the upper echelons of the capital. Regarding this matter, many people clapped their hands and cheered. In their opinion, this was the price that Yang Chendong had to pay for bringing down Yu Shuriwei. You can't take all the benefits. Yu Shuriwei had fallen from power, and Yang Chendong had to leave for a period of time. It was really a lose-lose situation. Whether it was the Yang clan's prosperity in business or the uniqueness of the Yang clan's academy. In truth, Yang Chendong didn't have many friends among the scholars. He didn't fit in with the crowd, and he didn't take the initiative to interact with others. He always maintained a lofty attitude as he drifted away from the circles of power. Of course, this would make the acting sect master, Zhu Qiyu, let down his guard, but at the same time, the disadvantage would also be revealed. In some matters, there would be few people who would speak up for him. This time, Yang Chendong was going to leave. Everyone rejoiced even more. Some people even criticized that this move could not be taken as a sign. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't try to explain this. He believed that facts spoke louder than words, and there would come a day when he would tell these people with his actions. At that time, he could almost see how resounding that slap would be. While everyone was saying that Yang Chendong had to leave the capital, there were naturally some people who disagreed. For example, the people of the Yang clan. Yang Chendong's fourth brother was one of them. Putting aside the fact that he was originally a member of the Yang clan, he had to consider the interests and reputation of the Yang clan. Ever since Yang Chendong came to the capital, his life had been completely different from before. Internally, there was more money in the estate, and he didn't need to plan carefully before he dared to do anything. Externally, he could walk on the streets with a straighter back. Even when chatting with people he was familiar with or in formal occasions, when others introduced him, their expressions would become much more respectful. Not only would this make one's face glow, it would also slowly give birth to a feeling of complacency. Yang wasn't a fool, and he naturally knew who had given him all this. Thus, when he heard that Yang Chendong was leaving, he absolutely couldn't bear to part with him. Later on, the steward at his side casually said, "Why not go with the Duke? You're returning to your hometown to pay respects to your ancestors, and Yang is originally a member of the Yang clan. Nothing could be more appropriate than to go back and take a look." These unintentional words immediately moved Yang Chendong, and he hurried over just as Yang Chendong was preparing to leave 3 days later. Yang Hodong truly hadn't expected that his fourth brother would want to go with him to the south. This time, He was using the excuse of returning to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. But as for what he was really going to do, only he knew best. His fourth brother's sudden appearance was indeed somewhat out of his expectations. But it was only a little unexpected. This clearly wasn't much compared to the major things Yang Qindong planned to do in the future. Thinking about it, since fourth brother had such thoughts, it would be a good idea to bring him back with him. This way, there would be a proper person in charge during the ancestral worship ceremony, and he would be able to worry less and use less of his brain power. Yang Qindong agreed. After all, he couldn't find any reason to refuse. But because of this, Yang was overjoyed. He hurriedly left the Yang clan manor, and he also needed to return to his residence to pack up. Of course, compared to Yang Qindong, who had a lot of things to take care of, he didn't need to worry as much. It was only 3 days, and it really passed in the blink of an eye. 3 days later, Yang Qindong set off. First Madame Hu Yin and third Madame Shui squeezed into the soft sedan chair with him. The others were indeed not as fortunate, and most of them followed on foot. Only the master, Yang Qindong, fourth master, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others rode horses. Most of them, Lung Feng, walked. Among the people riding horses was the Yang clan's old housekeeper, Yang Hai. As an old man who had followed the old master for decades, young Master Yang was no longer young, and his hair was more white than black. This time, he was going to follow Yang Qindong back to the Jian clan's old house, and he would most likely retire there in the future. This time, when he left, tears flowed down his face. They were tears that he couldn't bear to part with his son, Guanyang of the Yang clan manor. After all, transportation was not developed in ancient times. After this separation, no one knew if they would meet again in their lives. As Yang Qindong's guards, the first captain, Qiu Vi, and the second captain, Dao Xiao, naturally had to follow him. Not only that, Wu Sheng led a company of Lung Feng to protect him on the way. Yang Xin secretly led the main staff of the Security Bureau, as well as the members of the Wolf Fong and Go Shadow Sniper team, to follow him closely. With them, unless the Great Ming Dynasty sent an army to suppress the border and could charge fearlessly, it was unlikely that they could threaten Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong finally left the capital. On this day, in many corners of the capital and in many important places, there were sighs of relief. They didn't feel it before, but now that Yang Qindong had left, they seemed to be relieved and could finally breathe a sigh of relief. As for why all this was happening, no one could explain it clearly. While the people in the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty were greatly relieved, on the other side of the sea, the land of Japan was covered with dark clouds at this moment, and thunder was brewing, as if it was waiting to explode at any time. The General's Mansion, also known as the Great General's Mansion, was the mansion of the famous Japanese General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In the capital of Japan, Ping, and Beijing, on the most prosperous street, which the Japanese called Kyoto, there was a large courtyard that covered 4 square areas. At this time, if one could look down from the sky, he would find that there were people coming and going in this courtyard. There were no less than 500 patrolling warriors, not to mention some slaves who were responsible for serving their masters, and some hidden forces. This was the power of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. It could be seen from the place where he lived. If it had to be described, it could be called a prince's mansion or even a small imperial palace. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very flamboyant in his work. In his early years, he had helped the current Empress of Japan, who was known as the Emperor of Howa Court, ascend to the throne. Based on this kind of luxury was not excessive. Almost like the Great Ming Dynasty, Japan was also in a serious feudal era, and there was a clear hierarchy between people. In comparison, the imperial family was naturally the most powerful force, followed by the civil officials and generals, followed by the merchants, samurai, ninjas, and finally the ordinary soldiers. The lowest level was the slaves, and the number of slaves was not small, accounting for more than 3/5 of the total population of Japan at that time. It could also be said that the development of Japan at that time was based on the contributions of the slaves, and the minority was built up by eating, drinking, and playing. As a minority of the minority, Ashikaga Yoshimasa controlled most of the military power in the country. In many cases, his power could even compete with the imperial family. Some military affairs had reached the point where it was difficult to carry out without his consent. As time went by, more and more people came to him, and his power grew bigger and bigger. This morning, there were still many people at the side door of the general's mansion. Most of them were pretentious. They all said that they were excellent and wanted to be noticed by Bo-le, because this often meant that they were likely to rise to the sky and officially become a high-ranking person in society. Chapter 333. Every time the side door opened and the steward of the general's residence came out, they would fight to be the first to present their invitations. However, no one knew how many of them would be chosen by the general in the end. It had been more than 2 hours since breakfast, and the side door had yet to open. Many of the people who were waiting were anxious. They did not know what was going to happen to them, and some of them did not even have time for dinner. Just as they were feeling anxious, the main door of the general's residence suddenly opened. This movement instantly attracted everyone's attention. Out of instinct, their footsteps were almost jogging as they moved forward. From their point of view, it was either the general's residence was welcoming an important guest or the general was going out. If it was the latter, this would be the best opportunity for them to recommend themselves. They moved quickly. The samurais who rushed out of the general's residence moved even faster. They were the first to rush out and formed a human net to cut off the connection between the side door and the main door. Then, they stood still like wooden pillars and stared vigilantly at the people who wanted to come to the general's residence. They looked like they were about to tell them to be obedient. If anyone dared to move, the sharp katanas in their hands would not recognize them. The solemn atmosphere with a trace of killing intent finally caused everyone to stop in their tracks. Then, they looked curiously at the main door of the general's residence. They wanted to see what was going on that caused such a huge commotion. While everyone was waiting, there was finally movement at the main door of the general's residence. A sedan slowly came in, and a group of people appeared on both sides. No one could clearly see who was coming. What was even more surprising was that the sedan actually went straight through the main door of the general's residence and slowly disappeared from everyone's sight. This sudden scene really stimulated everyone. Then, everyone seemed to have forgotten their purpose of coming here and started to guess who the guest was. A guest who could make the general's residence open the main door to welcome naturally had a high status. Even in the entire Japan, there were not many people who could receive such an honor, not to mention such a mysterious guest. The identity of the guest only made everyone more curious. In the inner courtyard of the general's residence, the palanquin entered as though there was no one around. It only came to a stop in front of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's reception hall. Then, the curtains of the palanquin opened and a man wearing a dark modern Tang suit walked out. His attire did not match the attire of the time. As soon as the man appeared, he first looked around. When he found that this was a very quiet, small courtyard, a trace of satisfaction appeared on his face. Right at this moment, a burst of bold laughter came from the hall. A tall man with a mustache laughed and spoke in standard Japanese. "Welcome to Jing Xuanquan's presence. You must be tired from the journey. Greetings, great general." Jing Xuang, on behalf of Commander Gao Xiong, pays his respects to the great general. The man in the dark-colored Tang suit, called Jing Xuang, immediately lowered his head and said with great respect, "That's right. The person who came was Jing Xuang, one of the students that Yang Chendong personally taught. Later, because of his outstanding learning ability, he became one of the first political instructors in Yang Xie's new army. His father was the current director of the Chisin City cement factory. His name was Jing Guang, and he was also one of the people that Yang Chendong admired and trusted. This time, Jing Xuang appeared in Japan at the general's residence under the orders of Regiment Commander Gao Xiong. He came to Japan to meet with General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had real power in Japan. At the same time, he also wanted to show the general the tablet that recorded Princess Junko personally killing Kimura Yoshimasa in the basement of a Yang family manor. Ever since Yang Xie's new army occupied Chisin City and began to develop vigorously, they began to slowly control this area of the sea. As Japan was a maritime country, it was inevitable that they would trade with their neighboring countries. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would come into contact with each other. After several conflicts, Ashikaga Yoshimasa did not gain the slightest advantage. Out of respect for the strong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa began to purposefully make contact with Yang Xie's new army. This matter was reported to the higher-ups, and with Yang Qindong's approval, Gao Xiong also intentionally or unintentionally expressed some goodwill. Thus, the relationship between the two sides began to strengthen. This might be the strength of the Japanese, but it might also be their weakness. When you were stronger than them, they would always lower their heads and act like a dog, and then learn from your advanced knowledge and experience. They would even nod their heads and bow their heads, shamelessly. However, there would come a day when they had the strength to overtake you, and it would inevitably be a merciless blow. For example, towards the powerful Yang Xie's new army at sea, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had always shown sufficient respect. This time, when he learned that the other party's envoy wanted to meet with him, he was extremely respectful. This was the reason for the scene just now. Under the warm welcome of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, Jing Shuang stepped into the guest hall, and the two of them began the so-called friendly discussion. As if he did not want his subordinates to see his weak and submissive side, or perhaps he knew that Jing Shuang's arrival had a special meaning, Ashikaga Yoshimasa quickly cleared everyone in the hall, and then personally poured a glass of sake for Jing Shuang. His originally smiling face became much more serious. Jing Shuang-kun, I wonder what brings you here this time? Is Commander Gao Xiong willing to form an alliance with this general? Forming an alliance at sea had always been Ashikaga Yoshimasa's wish. After knowing the power of Commander Gao Xiong's new warship through different channels, the general who envied the strong and longed for the powerful has always been fighting for this goal. For this reason, he did not hesitate to sell several merchant ships in Japan to the other party, just to gain a favorable impression and a basis for cooperation. This time, Jing Shuang's sudden arrival naturally gave him hope for the future. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's longing gaze was seen in Jing Shuang's eyes. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall what he had said when he attended the meeting with Commander Gao Xiong and the Naval Operations Staff Officer. When everyone thought that they could form a temporary alliance with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, they could rely on the other party's influence and powerful intelligence network to obtain more information on the sea. From there, they could take some targeted actions. This was far better than randomly searching the sea and trying their luck. The staff officers all agreed that even if they formed an alliance with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and even let them view the new warships and warships, they would not be able to steal this advanced knowledge. This was originally a matter of mutual benefit, but for some reason, when this matter was reported to the young master of the capital, it was denied without hesitation. Moreover, no reason was given for this denial, which made Commander Gao Xiong and the staff officers very confused. But no matter what they thought, since this was the decision made by the sixth young master, no one dared to question it, and no one could change it. These people had all seen the glory of the sixth young master, and they all knew that everything that Chikin City and everyone else had today was thanks to the sixth young master. They were also the group that had been the most heavily brainwashed. In their words, any decision made by the sixth young master, they would resolutely uphold it. Any decision made by the sixth young master, they would unswervingly follow it. This was the so-called Tu Van Ease. His thoughts returned to reality. Facing Ashikaga Yoshimasa's urgent gaze, Jing Shuang lightly shook his head. Then, without waiting for the other party to say anything disappointed, he changed the topic. Great General, although we cannot form an alliance with you this time, we have come with great sincerity. Sincerity? Ashikaga Yoshimasa was somewhat disappointed that the two sides couldn't form an alliance, but after hearing Jing Shuang's words, he became interested. He didn't know what else could be considered sincerity other than the so-called alliance. Although the trace of disdain in his eyes quickly disappeared, For Jing Shuang, who worked in politics and dealt with people's hearts every day, it was still sharply observed by him. However, he didn't say anything. Instead, he smiled and took out a tablet that was hundreds of years older than the current era from his bag. When the white tablet was taken out, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's expression didn't change. Obviously, before he saw its function, he only treated it as an ornamental object. He didn't know that it had the ability to record people's figures. Of course, he soon knew that Jing Shuang, who had practiced several times, turned on the tablet with familiarity and then carefully inserted the USB flash drive in her arms. All these movements in the eyes of Ashikaga Yoshimasa had long made him stunned. The moment the tablet was turned on, he was actually petrified. When he saw the colorful screen on it, he didn't know what words to use to describe his current mood. He only knew that he was scared, and even a little scared. When a USB flash drive was plugged in, it began to play the scene of Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami being tied up. This great general, who had experienced many wars and been on the battlefield, couldn't help but exclaim in shock, "How did you put Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami in this thing?" That's right, Ikegami, Ikegami, Ikegami. Jing Shuang didn't want to explain such a layman's words, but he did forget that when he first came into contact with these things, he had the same reaction. Great general, don't be impatient, just keep watching. Reminded by Jing Shuang, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's eyes fell back on the tablet screen, and then he saw Junko holding a dagger. At this moment, he still couldn't help but shout, "Your Highness Junko!" It was just that after this shout, Ashikaga Yoshimasa quickly shut his mouth without being reminded, as if he was afraid that he would miss something because of shouting. Chapter 334. On the screen, Junko appeared, and then killed Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami, who were powerless to resist, and then quietly left. When the video reached this point, Jing Shuang simply closed the computer, and then the hall was silent for a while. The sudden scene gave Ashikaga Yoshimasa an unreal illusion. He had never experienced such an experience, so when he looked at Jing Shuang, he couldn't help but make a request. "Can you show me again?" "Okay, but please don't talk anymore. Watch carefully. Remember, you only have one chance. You should know that such a sign doesn't appear at all times." After saying all this in a mysterious manner, Jing Shuang opened it again and released it. The scene she had just seen was displayed once again. This time, Ashikaga Yoshimasa looked very carefully. When he was sure that he saw Kimura Yoshida and the other two, his face became very ugly. At this moment, he wasn't thinking about how this thing appeared in front of him. What he was thinking about was that it was actually the hand of the lady. Where did she get the courage to do such a thing? Could it be that she was instructed by the emperor? Kimura Yoshida was one of his people, and the Japanese leaders were very clear about this. Now that this person was targeted, did it mean that the emperor was already dissatisfied with him and was going to kill him? All this was just to eliminate external forces. If he didn't do anything, he was afraid that the next big knife would fall on his head. A sudden visit, a real scene that he had never seen before, stirred up the heart of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had charged into the battlefield and planned strategies. Seeing that he fell into silence, Jing Shuang, who was sitting opposite him, had no expression on her face, but her heart was very clear that a seed of hatred was planted. As for what effect it would have, it all depended on the development of the next thing. There's heaven above, there's Suzhou and Hangzhou below. The illusion came from Song Fan Qingda's records of Wu County. Heaven above, Suzhou, and Hangzhou below. It meant that heaven above was the most beautiful, and Suzhou and Hangzhou were the most beautiful. It described the beauty, prosperity, and wealth of Suzhou and Hangzhou. The beautiful scenery of Hangzhou was unparalleled in the world, and the scenery of the West Lake was the best in the world. Many popular stories had appeared here in the past. For example, Bai Suzhen and Su Xian had met here by chance. At this moment, the Lei Feng Tower in the story was still standing. Opposite the Lei Feng Pagoda, there were numerous restaurants, which were specially set up for people who came here to rest and eat. Among them, the largest restaurant, Xinglong Restaurant, was by the window. The view here was broad, and the scenery was excellent. In addition, it was May, the time when spring and summer alternated. It was indeed a place with birds singing and flowers fragrant. It was better than the polar regions of the world. The table in the best position was already filled with famous local snacks. The signature dishes of the restaurant were spread all over the table, showing that the guests who came to eat were rich and imposing. A pot of old wine that had been warmed was still sitting on the table. Occasionally, a spring breeze would blow past, and the fragrance of the wine would be blown out. When one smelled it, it was really mellow and rich, making one intoxicated. Six brother, this place is really good. The climate is pleasant. I don't want to go back. Next to the table, a rather elegant middle-aged man tasted the delicious food on the table and couldn't help but say. Then he kept greeting the other two women at the table. Come on, sisters-in-law, don't just look at the beautiful scenery. You also need to eat. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste? Yes, fourth brother is right. The two women who were greeted shyly nodded their heads. They were both beautiful and had white veils on their faces. However, the youngest man at the table first moved the corners of his mouth slightly, and then he said with a smile, since you were here to have fun, you don't need to wear a veil. It's hard to see things. Take it away. I'll listen to sixth brother. Hu Yin, who was called, seemed to have a little struggle in her heart, but in the end, she obediently took off her veil. Sure enough, at this moment, when looking at the beautiful scenery of West Lake in the distance, it was much clearer and more thorough. At this point, everyone could guess that the four people at the table were Yang Qindong, Hu Yin, and Madame Shui. After leaving the capital, they went all the way south. They passed by Tianjin, Suzhou, and bought some good and famous silk and satin. Then they went to Songjiang Prefecture and arrived in Hangzhou. As soon as they entered this place, Hu Yin and Madame Shui were very excited. They had heard about White Snake from Yang Qindong, so they were naturally curious about this place. Now that they had the opportunity to see this scene, how could they not be immersed in it? At the same time, they also wanted to see if they could really see the deified love story between White Snake and Su Xian here. In later generations, there was a song that said, "The stories and fairy tales are all lies." At this moment, it was indeed true. From a distance, there were many people who came here to play. However, by Jinxing in white, the maid Xiao Qing in green, and Su Xian in scholars' robes were nowhere to be seen. There wasn't even a single person who looked like them. Hu Yin, who was full of hope, was disappointed because she couldn't find any of them. Madame Shui, who was standing beside them, said something. She probably said that her husband was good at teasing people. Anyway, the two girls kept laughing. It was very indecent for a woman to laugh in a diplomatic setting, especially a married woman. Although Yang felt a little uncomfortable, he still endured it in the end. His sixth brother wasn't as simple as a younger brother. He could see everything clearly, so he must have a clear idea of what to do with women. Maybe there was a deeper meaning to this matter. However, Yang Qindong's thinking was simply based on the ideas of the later generations. Equality between men and women was not necessarily fair, but at least it was not strange for women to laugh in public. Since they came out to play, they just wanted to have fun. As long as they were happy, it was fine. As for whether such behavior would attract other people's attention, he didn't care very much. Few people here knew him, and it wouldn't be long before he left here. It was just a post house in life. There was no need to be so serious. Yang Qindong didn't take the two women's laughter to heart. He looked deeply and quietly at the West Lake in front of him. In his previous life, Yang Dong had been very busy. He trained, completed tasks, trained again, and completed tasks again. It wasn't until he was old and his physical fitness and stamina had declined that he went to the headquarters. As a result, his beautiful life and youth were wasted. It was good to be young again at this moment. He would cherish every minute and every second. 9 out of 10 things in life did not go according to one's wishes. Yang Qindong wanted to properly feel this tranquil atmosphere. However, there was a burst of extremely noisy noise coming from downstairs. Although it was separated by the floor and could not be completely transmitted, it was obvious that there was some agitation. Ding, ding, ding. The sound of footsteps quickly began to be heard. Then, a middle-aged man in brocade clothes came up with a face full of anxiety. After Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were guarding the entrance of the building, confirmed that there was no murderous intent on the other party, they invisibly let the man go, allowing him to smoothly come to Yang Chendong's table. "Oh, honored guest, I'm really sorry. Your table was originally reserved. Now that the owner is here, I want to see if you—" The middle-aged man's surname was Sunday. He was the owner of Xinglong Restaurant. Just now, he was the one who received Yang Chendong and his group. He also said that the condition of the private room upstairs facing the street was the best, and so on. But how did the private room get booked in the blink of an eye? This matter was rather intriguing and thought-provoking. As one of the capital's hedonistic sons, Yang had experienced this kind of thing more than once or twice. It must be said that businessmen were all profit-seeking. Sometimes, they were especially serious in this aspect. They could tell several different stories and different versions with just a few words. Of course, sometimes they might be coerced. After all, the status of businessmen in the Great Ming Dynasty was not high. They once had no social status. Just like now, Boss Sun was urging him to say such words. Perhaps he wanted to make more money, or perhaps he was being pressured by something. But no matter what, this was a bit like bullying. Yang, who was clear about this, would not give in to the other party. He immediately stood up from the table and said with a serious face, "What's the matter? What do you mean it's already reserved? That's not what you said just now." No matter what, he was still a descendant of the Yang family. He had been influenced by what he saw and heard since he was a child. He also had the experience of being an official, so he had a kind of aura. As soon as these words came out of his mouth, Boss Sun felt a burst of pressure. But after all, as the owner of such a big restaurant, it was impossible to say that he did not have the ability to suppress his aura. Although he also knew that what he did today was a bit too much and wrong. But the situation was stronger than the person. When he thought of the master downstairs who insisted on this private room, he felt a headache coming. At this moment, he had to lower his head and explain, "I made a mistake. I forgot that this place was originally reserved. So today's meal is my treat. I'm sorry. Treat us? Do you think you're worthy?" Yang said without hesitation. Originally, he thought that there was something fishy about this matter. Now that the other party said that the bill was free, he felt more confident in his heart. "Okay, Boss Sunday, since you're in a difficult position, we won't argue with you. It just so happens that we're almost done eating, so we'll leave now." Yang Chendong finally spoke. Coming out to play was a mood. Now that the mood was ruined, even the best seats and scenery had lost their meaning at this moment. Since that was the case, it was better to leave and return to the inn. Chapter 335. Yang Chendong expressed his attitude. Although he was still angry and dissatisfied, he could only suppress it. He turned his head and snorted to express his dissatisfaction. Mr. Sun, on the other hand, kept bowing to Yang Chendong and thanking him. Then he turned around and led them downstairs in person. On the second floor of Xinglong Restaurant, 6 or 7 strong men were standing there and talking about something. From a distance, they seemed to be surrounding one of them and saying some flattering words. In Yang Chendong's life, this kind of thing couldn't be more insignificant. He didn't even want to take another look at it. However, there were many things in the world that had nothing to do with you even if you didn't want to. There were always some people who came to find you and could not be refused. Just like now, Yang Chendong and Mrs. Xue had walked past the corner of the second floor and went straight down to the first floor under the guidance of Mr. Sunday. Behind them, Hu Yin and Mrs. Xue followed. However, they seemed to be saying that their husband was lying. There was no such thing as White Lady and Su Xian here. When they talked about this, they couldn't help but chuckle. Just then, a gust of wind blew over and blew on Hu Yan's white veil. At a certain moment, the national beauty under the white veil was exposed. It happened to be seen clearly by a man in the crowd. It was not completely clear. He only knew that the woman was very beautiful and had very good skin. But this was enough. For many men, the more vague some things were, the more they could arouse their curiosity. If they could see through it at a glance, it would lose its original meaning. It was this glimpse that caused the man's heart to skip a beat. Then his body actually reacted in a primitive way. Perhaps he was used to such things, so he instinctively took a few hurried steps, passed through the crowd, and went straight to where Hu Yin and Mrs. Shui were. His reaction was not slow. Beta Persei, who was responsible for guarding Hu Yin and Mrs. Shui, instinctively reacted faster. When he felt a gust of wind, he had already stepped between the man who was about to do something. Scram! Suddenly, a tower-like man appeared in front of him. His figure was also very tall and sturdy, and he said this in an unfriendly manner. Then, he threw a punch over. Wind whistled as the punch was unleashed. Just by listening to the sound, one could determine the power of this punch. Boom! Beta Persei, who had hurriedly returned a punch, stood there as steady as Mount Tai, as if the punch just now was not his arm at all. The man who threw out the first punch couldn't help but stagger. He took 2 steps back before stabilizing himself. At this moment, his eyes were filled with anger. Who was Qi Qing? With his background, it could be said that he could do whatever he wanted in Hangzhou Prefecture. Not many people could control him. But now, not only did someone stop him, he was even forced to take 2 steps back in the domain that he was most proud of. This was not as simple as just suffering a loss. It had reached the level of humiliation. Qi Qing had another title, Hangzhou Divine Fist. But just now, the punch he had thrown out was a preemptive strike. Yet, not only was it casually dispelled by someone else, the other party didn't even move an inch, but he was forced to take 2 steps back. This was somewhat inconceivable. What's going on? Master Qi. The commotion here finally attracted the attention of others. When they saw Qi Qing's face alternating between white and red, the 7 men who were originally surrounding him and flattering him all gathered together. Then, they glared angrily at Beta Persei, who was standing there motionless. If anger could kill, Beta Persei would have died countless times by now. Yang Qindong, who was walking in front, also heard the commotion behind him. Although he did not have eyes in the back of his head and did not see what had just happened, he believed in Beta Persei. If the other party had not provoked him first, Beta Persei would never have made a move. While Yang Qindong was still thinking about what had happened, his 4th brother, Yang, had already strode over, shouting as he walked over, "What's going on? Who ate the bear's heart and leopard's gall? Looking for trouble, huh?" This was the way of the foppish. No matter what happened, it was always necessary to gain the upper hand by a show of strength. Perhaps if they were lucky, they could directly intimidate the other party into not daring to speak again. Then, it would be much easier to solve the problem. Of course, people who dared to speak like this more or less had to have some background. Otherwise, there would always be a moment when they would be exposed and unable to continue pretending. Of course, Yang was considered to have some background. Putting everything else aside, just by mentioning his 6th brother's name, he could do whatever he wanted in the capital. There were not many people who were blind enough to offend him. But the capital was the capital after all, and this was Hangzhou. None of them knew Yang. Seeing that someone had suddenly walked over while shouting and charging straight at them, Qi Qing, who had suffered at the hands of Beta Persei, had a flash of anger on his face. Then, he suddenly gave up on the confrontation with Beta Persei and changed his target to Yang, charging straight at him. Perhaps as a martial artist, he could tell that Yang was only good at talking, so he wanted to pick on the weaker one to show his strength. But what he did not know was that this time, he had picked the wrong opponent. Although Yang Qindong was not good at martial arts and only relied on brute force to fight, how could he let his 4th brother be at a disadvantage when Yang Qindong was here? Just as Qi Qing suddenly rushed over, another figure had already rushed out first. Then, with a bang, after a loud sound, a human figure continuously retreated until his body hit 2 tables in succession. Only then did he stop. Although his figure had stopped, he was still in an extremely sorry state. His originally clean clothes were stained with vegetable soup and oil, and he looked like a drowned rat. Standing opposite him was a young man who was not tall, but had a very sturdy body. His eyes were cold, and at this moment, he was squatting in a firm horse stance. His eyes were full of provocation. After being pushed back twice in a row, Chi-Ching only felt a sense of suffocation in his chest. Usually, when he fought with people in Hangzhou, how many of them could withstand a few moves from him? Because of this, he gained the reputation of the Hangzhou Godly Fist. For this reason, he even founded a martial arts center called the Boxing Hall. Many people in the martial arts world would respectfully clasp their fists and greet him when they saw him, sect leader Qi. That was a very honorable thing to do. But today, he had actually suffered 2 losses in a row in front of a group of people. He had lost to 2 different people, and both times, he had gained the upper hand by striking first. How could this not make him angry? He felt that all the moves he had learned in the past seemed to have become useless. Chi-Ching, who had lost a lot of face, could not swallow this bitter fruit. He glanced at his friends who came with him, and evil grew from his guts. He pointed at Beta Persei and the others and shouted, "Everyone, let's go together and cripple them. If anything happens, I, Chi-Ching, will be responsible." The 7 people around him were all here for Chi-Ching. They more or less had something to ask of this person in the future. Now that their benefactor had spoken, there was no reason to not listen. They thought that this was Hangzhou, and everyone was more or less people of status. They were just a group of brave foreigners, so what was there to be afraid of? With this thought in mind, the 7 of them first exchanged glances across the air, then shouted and rushed toward Beta Persei and the others. And from the looks of it, 3 or 4 of them had learned martial arts. At least when they fought, their postures were very good. Qiu, go easy on them. Don't kill them. Yang Shandong had already seen the situation clearly. Although he did not know the reason, these people had come to find fault with them again and again. Since that was the case, there was no need to be polite. He just needed to teach them a lesson. Qiu, who had defeated Chi-Ching earlier and whose eyes were filled with murderous intent, heard Yang Shandong's order. He immediately nodded and then waved his hand. 7 people from the first guard team walked out to meet the 7 opponents who were shouting and rushing toward them. They were not equal in strength to begin with. When they fought, the situation was naturally one-sided. Among the 7 people, even the so-called martial arts master who had learned 2 styles could only block 1 move from the members of the Cold Front team. Then, he was beaten up passively. The shouts of being beaten quickly spread throughout the 2nd floor of the restaurant. What happened here had already frightened the other diners. Those who were timid had already run out, leaving behind those who were bold. When they saw Chi-Ching being beaten up, they all ran away. This might be the influence of evil people, because Chi-Ching was an evil person who knew if he would find trouble with those who saw him suffer after he recovered from his shock. All the unrelated people had run away, leaving only Boss Sun of Xinglong Restaurant. He was also helpless. The monk could run away, but the temple could not. It was probably describing people like him. Aya, stop fighting. It's all a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Sect Master Qi is a person of status. You guys stop. Boss Sun tried to stop the fight, but he was afraid that he would be hurt. He pretended to go forward and shouted loudly, as if he wanted to use these words to scare the foreigners who came to his restaurant for the first time. In fact, there was no need for Boss Sun to shout. The members of the Cold Front team had already stopped. This kind of blindly beating people up did not feel good. It was like an adult facing a 3-year-old child. No matter how they beat, they would lose interest. Let's go. Yang Shandong could also see that this was not a fair fight. He shook his head disinterestedly. With Yang Shandong's words, the members of the Cold Front team naturally returned to their team. However, when they left the restaurant, everyone was clearly more vigilant. In the dark, the people from the Security Bureau had already seen everything. Then, they began to carry out their activities. Chapter 336. There was a large courtyard in the East District of Hangzhou. This was one of the outer residences of the Chang clan, a wealthy merchant in the south. Chang Qianhao, as the eldest son of the Chang clan and the future head of the Chang clan, was carefully standing in front of the man in green clothes in the courtyard. Qian Hao, there are no outsiders here, so you don't have to be so restrained. Standing in front of him was Yang Chendong. When he saw Chang Qianhao's serious and even somewhat nervous appearance, he tried to use words to enlighten him. The more he said this, the more nervous and cautious Chang Qianhao became. Master, the ancients said that a teacher for a day is a father for life. You have done a great favor for Chang Qianhao and the Chang clan. Okay. Knowing what he was going to say next, Yang Chendong gently patted his forehead and said helplessly, regarding the matter of handing over the Heavens Beyond Trading Company in the south to the Chang clan, as my student, you naturally have a certain connection, but more importantly, I still considered the strength of the Chang clan. Besides, not only your Chang clan, but the other clans in the south also have resources allocated. This is originally a normal business, so you don't have to be so grateful to me. No, Master, the ratio of the Chang clan is the highest. For this matter, the grandfather in charge of the clan has already sent a letter to Qian Hao, asking me to take care of Master's food and accommodation no matter what. But I don't know if there is anything that Master is dissatisfied with. No, everything is very good, very good. Yang Chendong chuckled. He could feel the admiration and gratitude of this student to him. Some of the rare goods of Heavens Beyond were indeed distributed to the Chang clan due to the fact that the other party was his student. However, he still couldn't accept such an action of greeting twice a day. Young Master, Yang San is here. The timely appearance of Tiger's mane could be considered as a solution. Chang Qianhao had studied in the Yang Clan Academy for half a year, so he naturally knew that the identity of the person who came was not simple. He also knew that Yang Chendong had something important to do, so he respectfully took his leave and said that he would come to pay his respects before dinner. Chang Qianhao respectfully left. Yang Chendong didn't wait for Tiger's mane to speak and spoke first. Look after him. I don't have time to see him tonight, so he doesn't have to pay his respects. Oh, Tiger's mane wanted to laugh, but he didn't dare to. He naturally saw that because of Chang Qianhao's excessive enthusiasm, the young master was already vexed. All right, let Yang San in. Yang Chendong could see that he was gloating a little, but he also knew that there were some things that he ordered and the other party would do very well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become his best confidant. Speaking of business, Tiger's man did not dare to be negligent in the slightest. He turned around and left. Yang Chendong soon followed him to Yang Chendong. Then, some specific information about Qi Qing was sent to him. Hangzhou Divine Fist? Qi Busen? Interesting. Yang Chendong's voice sounded from the courtyard with a smile that was not a smile. Hangzhou Government Office. In the backyard, a wailing sound came from one of the rooms. The sound was so loud that everyone in the courtyard became very cautious. A middle-aged man dressed in a fourth-rank official's robe was currently pacing back and forth in the courtyard. Perhaps it was due to his anxiety, but all the servants in the courtyard were extremely cautious, as if they were afraid that they would do something that they shouldn't do and provoke this official, resulting in them being severely punished. The man's name was Qi Busen. He was the prefect of Hangzhou, a fourth-rank official. The wailing man in the room was Qi Qing, who was beaten up. He was also Qi Bushin's cousin. The two of them grew up together and had a very good relationship. When he returned with wounds all over his body, the entire estate was in chaos. The steward of the estate immediately invited a famous physician from Hangzhou Prefecture to examine his illness. The screams in the room earlier were probably due to the commotion caused by the palpation. Creak. The door of the room was pushed open from the inside. Then, the housekeeper accompanied a doctor who was carrying a medicine box and walked out. Qi Busen, who saw all of this, quickly went up to the doctor and asked anxiously, "How is he?" Reporting to the prefect, sect leader Qi did not suffer any internal injuries. There is only one fracture and many bruises on his body. I'm afraid that he will need to rest for a period of time before he can recover, the doctor answered carefully. Oh, thank you. Men, double the consultation fee and send the doctor out. Qi Busen waved his hand and then entered the room with the housekeeper. Then he saw Qi Qing lying on the bed and whimpering softly. Noticing that someone had come, Chi Ching's voice became louder. When he saw that it was his cousin, his voice became even louder. He cried out in pain and said, "Cousin, you must avenge your younger brother. You don't know how arrogant the people on the other side were. They just said that they didn't like me and beat me up. When I asked them if they still cared about the law, they still ignored me." The guilty party complained first. All of this was reflected in Chi Ching's actions, and it seemed that Chi Bus-hin was very receptive to it. Bastards, they actually dare to ignore the laws of the great Ming dynasty. They're truly lawless. Housekeeper, immediately find out where those people are staying and then order the bailiffs to arrest them. This official wants to see if they really have 3 heads and 6 arms and are really ignoring the laws. Since the master had said so, the housekeeper originally wanted to ask if they should investigate the other party's identity first. However, at this moment, he could only suppress these words in his heart. At this moment, he was unlucky and said something that he should not say. It was not a wise thing to do. If he did not do it well, he might even vent his anger on himself. How could Chi Bus-hin, who could become the prefect of Hangzhou and a 4th-rank official, be stupid? However, he still did not send anyone to investigate. It was all based on his strong self-confidence. He was the prefect of Hangzhou and the local emperor of this piece of land. With this kind of power, how many people could make him feel afraid? Not to mention, he also had a very strong backer. Even if there were some problems, he was the kind of person who would protect him. Based on these 2 points, he was naturally fearless. He wanted to let those who hurt his cousin know that the Chi family was not an existence that anyone could provoke. The housekeeper went out and quickly found that those who hit Chi Ching were living in the outer residence of the Chong family. When he found out about these things, the housekeeper felt confident. Although the Chong family was very rich, they were after all just businessmen. Since ancient times, people did not fight with officials. How could they be a match for the officials? Feeling confident, the housekeeper found his relative, Niu Ji, who was arranged to be a constable in the prefect of Hangzhou. Niu Ji's nickname was Niu-er. It was because he was the 2nd son in the family that he got this name. Since he was young, his body was better than others. Later on, he learned martial arts from a famous teacher for a few years. After he learned martial arts, he found the housekeeper's relative and was arranged to be the head of the constables in the prefectural government. With the housekeeper's help, naturally, this constable's life was smooth. This time, there was a good thing again. Of course, he would not forget Niu Ji. When Niu Ji received the housekeeper's order, he knew that this was a good job to please the prefectural government. He did not dare to be tough. Immediately, he led a group of constables to the outer residence of the Chong family. At this time, the outer residence of the Chong family was shrouded in darkness. It seemed to be very quiet, but in fact, in the darkness, there were many pairs of eyes staring at this place. During the day, they beat someone in Xinglong restaurant. It was said that they had some influence in the local area. According to the rule that caution was the parent of safety, Tiger's Mane had arranged for people to wait for a long time. Reality proved that this waiting was not in vain. Not long after nightfall, there was a burst of noisy footsteps on the street in the distance. Then, a walking fire dragon came straight in this direction. That was the state when the bailiffs of the manor walked with torches. They're coming, they're coming. They're all ready. Once the order is given, we'll start immediately. Tiger Head, Tiger Ray's nickname, said that we have to be quick and clean. Yang Wu's voice came out. This time, Yang Si and Yang Lu were left behind in Yang Village, and the capital to be in charge of the work there. He was lucky to be brought out. Seeing that there was a battle to fight, he was very excited. With Yang Wu as the leader, they borrowed a platoon of Lung Feng from Wusheng camp. In addition, there was the cooperation of the Second Guard, Dao Xiao, and the Ghost Shadow Sniper team in the dark to deal with any unexpected situations. With such a lineup, not to mention some constables and constables of the prefectural government, even if a few hundred Ming soldiers came, they would not be afraid at all. The fire dragon came closer and closer. The one at the front, holding a torch, was the constable Niu Ji. When he saw the outer residence of the Chong family from afar, he waved his hand majestically and said, "Go, surround them. Remember, don't let anyone escape." Nyoji's voice was not soft. He was not worried that such a shout would scare them away. This might be his arrogance and conceit. However, regardless of whether he was careless or cautious, he was destined to suffer tonight. Just like now, when Nyoji's voice sounded, the 20 or so constables were about to split up. Suddenly, the surroundings lit up. High-voltage flashlights were suddenly turned on. When dozens of light beams shone on them, it made them feel as if they were instantly blinded. What's going on? Nyoji raised his right hand to block his eyes that were temporarily blinded by the light and asked casually. Even at this moment, he did not know that he had already become a fish on the chopping block in the eyes of others. Pa! Clang! Clang! Ouch! All kinds of painful cries rose and fell at this moment. Each of the constables who were like wolves and tigers a moment ago had turned into soft-footed shrimps. Some of them bent over and fell to the ground, wailing in pain. Among them, Nyoji was the one who received the most attention. Just now, after he shouted out, "What's going on?" he suddenly heard a gust of wind. As someone who had practiced martial arts, he instinctively stepped back. However, he only took one step back before he was suddenly tripped by something. Then, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Based on his intuition, he knew that someone had stepped on him. Chapter 337. This kick might not have been as heavy as 1,000 pounds, but it made him lose the ability to resist in an instant. Even he, the leader, was beaten to the ground in an instant. It was conceivable that the other brothers would not have a good time. The Lung Feng soldiers made their move. They originally had a thorough plan, since they had encountered some people who had underestimated them. How could they be courteous? Naturally, they greeted them with a good beating. Waves of cudgels came down. If it was not for the fact that they did not have the intention to kill, the more than 20 people who had come would have all died here. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the one-sided beating slowly stopped. Nyoji and the others were already covered in wounds, and no longer had the arrogant appearance they had before. Come on, tie them up. If anyone refuses to submit, just serve them with cudgels. Yang Wu stood in the crowd, his voice filled with pride. This time, he did not act impulsively. Hu Tu had said that this was the young master's order. Since he had received the order, if he did not exercise his fist properly, wouldn't he be wasting the mission and opportunity Hu Tu had given him? After the order was given, the Lung Feng soldiers took out the ropes that they had prepared earlier and started to work. However, the expected resistance did not happen. Perhaps they were really afraid of being beaten. Since ancient times, soldiers had always been used to catch thieves. Since when had thieves ever caught soldiers? And they just happened to encounter it. Who would be so stupid as to shout and scream? Soon, the originally noisy street became quiet again. If someone were to pass by this place at this time, they would never think that the dozens of officers had just been violently beaten up here. Yang Wu and the others were still staring with their eyes wide open, waiting for the enemy to come. According to their thinking, the sudden disappearance of more than 20 officials who had been sent out would cause a commotion. It was even reasonable that the Ming Dynasty's Hangzhou City Guard Association would take action. Unfortunately, one night had passed. When the sky began to brighten, indicating the arrival of a new day, there was still no movement. This made Yang Wu really disappointed. Back to the Qi residence, Qi Bushin's residence. Early in the morning, he was still hugging his concubine to sleep when suddenly, the housekeeper's shouting voice came from outside. "Master, it's not good. It's not good, master." What happened? Qi Busin, who had just woken up from his dream, got up from his bed with a face full of displeasure. He casually put on a piece of clothing and opened the bedroom door. Then, he scolded the housekeeper who was yelling outside. "Old master is fine, but you are disturbing his sleep early in the morning. What are you trying to do?" "I'm telling you, if you don't give me a reason, I won't let you off today." "Master, it's not good." Nyoji and the rest did not return for the entire night. I wonder where they went. Could he have been killed by those people? The housekeeper did not listen to what Qi Busin had to say. Instead, he spoke in a panic. "Last night, After assigning Niu Ji an errand, he came back to sleep. This was not the first time he had done such a task. All he had to do was to issue the order and then get up in the morning to see the results. However, when he went to the magistrate's office in the morning, he found out that Niu Ji and more than 20 other people had disappeared from the face of the earth. They were nowhere to be found. The bailiffs who stayed behind thought that Constable Niu had something important to do and needed to go somewhere far away, so they didn't see him for the whole night and didn't report to him. When the housekeeper heard the news, he immediately panicked. The Chang family's courtyard was in Hangzhou Prefecture City and was not far from the magistrate's office. It would take at most half an hour to get there. How could they not return for the whole night? His intuition told him that something must have happened. At that moment, he ran back to the Qi family's mansion and woke up his master. Initially, Qi Bushin's face was still full of anger. However, after hearing the housekeeper's words, he was stunned. After a few breaths, he finally reacted and exclaimed loudly, "How is this possible? How is this possible? Master, it's true. Those people must be very daring. Master, it's been a night. No one knows what will happen. Why don't we report it to the magistrate?" The housekeeper was so frightened that he was incoherent. He stood there trembling as he made his suggestion. Report it to the magistrate? Bastard! Master is the magistrate. Qi Bushin was so angry that he couldn't help but curse. No. Master, what I meant was to report to the Hangzhou guards and have them send troops into the city. Perhaps only with their appearance will we be able to suppress those daring criminals. The butler realized that he had made a slip of the tongue. After correcting himself, he hurriedly replied. After being reminded, Qi Bushin's originally panicked expression flashed with joy. However, he shook his head. No way. This is a serious matter. We still need to investigate it clearly. If it's a misunderstanding, then it will be a big joke. Once the Hangzhou guards were alerted and the army was mobilized, the matter would inevitably be reported to Nanjing. If it really alarmed the emperor and the imperial court, there would not be much room for negotiation. Qi Bushin shook his head and decided to clarify the matter first. The so-called clarification of the matter naturally fell on the housekeeper's head. The housekeeper naturally had a headache about this task. However, since it was his master who said it, he certainly did not dare to refuse. After agreeing, he rushed back to the magistrate's office. After returning to the magistrate's office, the housekeeper selected another 20 bailiffs and 4 constables who had learned martial arts. They went straight to the Chang family's residence. This time, it was broad daylight. He did not believe that anyone would dare to do anything to him. Of course, he was not unprepared. When he left a message in the magistrate's office. If he did not return in 2 hours, he was to inform his master and send troops to rescue him. Being prepared did not guarantee that he would not be afraid. He still felt a little uneasy when he arrived at the Chang family's residence. Unexpectedly, the door was already open. It was as if they knew that someone would come. When they saw the team he brought from afar, a man with a smile on his face came up to greet them. "May I know who you are? Please tell me." The other party was so polite that the housekeeper did not dare to force him. He thought that it would be impolite not to reciprocate. He clasped his fist and said, "I am the housekeeper of the magistrate of Hangzhou. My surname is Wu." "Housekeeper?" The person in front of him did not wait for him to finish his words. He shook his head and said, "With all due respect, this matter is not something that a housekeeper like you can shoulder. You should go back and ask your master to come here personally." After he finished speaking, the person in charge of welcoming the guest turned around and left. It was obvious that he was a little unhappy. Steward Wu knew that his status was still a little low, but since he was already here, he couldn't possibly not get to the bottom of things, right? He rushed toward the other party's departing figure and shouted, "Hey, are Niu Ji and the others in your hands? What did you do to them?" "Niu Ji? Haha, you mean the one who was beaten into a pig's head. If you want to know what happened to him, ask your master to come here personally." The man did not even turn his head. His figure gradually disappeared. After he returned to the residence, he closed the door. The man was Yang Wu. He was asked by the 6th young master to welcome the guest outside the door. He originally thought that the person who came would be the magistrate of Hangzhou. If the magistrate was sensible, it would not be a big deal. However, the person who came was just a housekeeper. Under the difference in status, there were many things that could not be discussed. Finally, he received news about Niu Ji and the others. After confirming that it was the other party who did it, the housekeeper turned around and left. His face was no longer nervous and fearful. Instead, it was burning with anger. How dare they detain the officials? Based on this alone, the other party was doomed. Half an hour later, the Hangzhou guard station nearby made their move. With 200 cavalrymen in the lead, 500 infantrymen followed closely behind. The large group of people entered Hangzhou from the southern city. They galloped on the streets, causing a lot of chaos. The commander of the Hangzhou guards, Tong Qiao, had a total of 5,600 people under him. The first 1,000 people under him had a total of 1,200 people under him. There were 1,000 people under him. They were usually in charge of the security around Hangzhou. Although they were in charge of security, there were not many things that could make them take action. Unless there was an enemy invading from a sea, most of the time, they were just idling around. This time, they suddenly received a request from the magistrate, Qi Busen. He said that a group of evildoers had appeared in the city. They had actually detained more than 20 officials privately. It seemed that they had also used some tricks. When the news first came, Tong Qiao did not hear it clearly. Of course, he did not dare to believe it. This was the world of the great Ming dynasty. The officials represented the image of the country. How could someone dare to harm them? Could it be that they were not afraid of the law? Or could it be that the status of these people was so high that they could do things without any scruples? However, the next news made Tong Qiao dispel this thought. It was said that the group of evildoers lived in the courtyard of the Chong family, a wealthy merchant in the south. This alone made him feel relieved. It was still the same sentence. The status of merchants was still very low at that time. If they were really people with status, how could they be willing to live in the courtyard of a merchant? It would only lower their status. Even if they were powerless people, Tong Qiao did not mind picking a soft persimmon to pinch. It just so happened that his brothers had not made money for a long time. This was a good opportunity. If it was done well, it would be a big income. Speaking of which, it was the Chong family. It was said that their wealth was comparable to that of a country. As a result, a group of 700 great Ming soldiers entered the city in a mighty manner. There were already bailiffs from the government office waiting to lead the way. Then, the group of people arrived outside the Chong family's courtyard and surrounded it. Guard the front and back doors. No one is allowed to slip away. In a while, when this general gives the order, everyone just needs to rush forward. If anyone dares to resist, use your weapons. Tong Qiao, who was riding on a horse and wearing armor, could be said to be majestic. Under his command, the Chong family's courtyard was soon surrounded by people that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Then, the 200 soldiers of the great Ming dynasty bravely walked toward the main door. They were in a row of 10 people. Every time they took a step forward, they would shout. Not to mention that their voices were very uniform. There was some momentum. Chapter 338. In the garden of the Chong family's courtyard. Small bridges, flowing water, lush green grass, mesmerizing flowers, colorful purples, pavilions, and painted rafters. All of them were the work of famous craftsmen. It was just a side courtyard, but it was already so luxurious. It could be seen that the Chong family was indeed rich and imposing. In the middle of the garden, there was a pavilion. On the stone table below, there were various fruits and snacks. A young man and an old man were sitting there, drinking tea and chatting. Duke of Loyalty and Courage. We haven't seen each other for nearly 2 years. On the other side of the table, an old man wearing an ordinary long robe had a smile on his face. He seemed to be in a good mood. Sir Kuei is still as elegant as ever. Congratulations. Yang Shandong also had a smile on his face. As he spoke, he raised the teacup in his hand. Ha! Duke of Loyalty and Courage must be joking. I still have to thank you for everything. If it weren't for you turning the tide on the battlefield back then, I'm afraid this old man would have been buried long ago. Thank you. Old man Kwang Yi also raised the wine in his arms and sighed with an emotional expression. In the Battle of the Tumu Fortress, because of Wang Zhan's careless command, the morale of the army was in chaos, and they were defeated by Walla's army. The officials were either dead or running away. It was complete chaos. At this time, Yang Qindong, who was inconspicuous in the team, stood up and successively saved the 9 important ministers of the imperial court. Later, he even saved the besieged Emperor Zhu Qizhen. Among the 9 officials, there was Kwang Yi. In the past, he was the Minister of War of the Great Ming Dynasty. Now, he was the Minister of War of the Southern Ming Dynasty. It was said that he was trusted by Emperor Yingzong. This time, he was ordered by the emperor to check the situation of the various imperial guards. Coincidentally, he learned that Yang Qindong had returned to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. Thus, he rushed here early in the morning to meet him. Although it was a coincidence, Yang Qindong had already asked around. Kwang Yi was a good old man. Although he was a little old, he still had some ability. To be able to meet him here and settle some matters was within his plan. At this moment, the two of them were able to meet each other as they wished. Furthermore, they had saved each other's lives as a bond. It could be said that both the host and the guest were extremely happy. However, this harmonious scene was disrupted by the battle cries outside the courtyard. Although Kwang Yi was a little older, his eyes were not blurry and his ears were not deaf. He could naturally hear the shouts outside clearly. He frowned and raised his head to look at Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong, who had long been paying attention to Kwang Yi's actions, smiled and said, I don't know why I was targeted yesterday. Some people came to find trouble with me, but they were caught by my subordinates. They must have mobilized the army this time. Nonsense. Who gave them the authority to mobilize the army for something as big as that? Guaning, go take a look, Kwang Yi said with a straight face. This time, he didn't come to see Yang Qindong just to catch up. He came with a mission. However, before he even had the chance to ask for help, his own people had already dropped the ball. If he didn't handle things well, it would directly affect his mission. How could he not be angry? Guaning was 7 feet tall and had a powerful body. His muscles seemed like they would explode with power at any time. At a glance, one could tell that he was a martial artist. Of course, the reason why Kwang Yi arranged for him to go out was not only because he was his trusted aide, but also because he was an official of the Ministry of War. He was selected to be the vice director of the department for purging officials and was a standard 5th rank official. The Department for Purging Officials was an organization under the Ministry of War during the Ming and Qing dynasties. It was responsible for the rank, selection, promotion, and rewards of the military officials. It was responsible for inspecting the strategic locations of various regions and setting up camps. It was also responsible for managing the inheritance and bestowments of the tribal officials who lived in communities of ethnic minorities. Most of the time, the rank of an official in the Great Ming Dynasty wasn't enough. The most important thing was how much power he had. For example, the first Grand Secretary of the Imperial Cabinet was equivalent to the Emperor's personal secretary. For example, Jiejin during the Ming Dynasty was a standard 5th rank official. Don't underestimate a standard 5th rank official. Even in front of the emperor, he could speak. He was much more powerful than a standard 4th or 3rd rank official. For example, Guaning was only a standard 5th rank official. However, because he controlled the promotion and rewards of the military officials, he had great power. Even many of the commanders, standard 3rd rank officials, of the City Guard Institute and the Capital Guard Institute had to lower their heads and smile apologetically when they saw him. Since the Capital Guard Institute had been mobilized, it was appropriate to send Guaning to take a look. Yang Qindong was naturally aware of this. He immediately smiled and said politely, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Vice Director Guan. You're too polite." Guan Ying's expression didn't change. After saying this with a serious face, he bowed to Kwang Yi and left. After Guaning left, Kwang Yi's laughter sounded again. "Duke of Loyalty, please don't mind him." This person's personality is like this. He doesn't smile much, but he is very serious and has some ability. Yes, to be able to learn from Lord Kuang, he is without a doubt a talent. Yang Chendong also smiled and flattered. Then, he raised the teacup in his hand. With Guaning taking care of the outside matters, he naturally didn't have to worry. Kuang Yi also smiled and raised his teacup. After taking a sip, he put it down and said, "Duke of Loyalty, a while ago, the Japanese suddenly invaded the border and attacked the Tianjin Guard. I'm sure you've heard about it." Yes, this matter caused a lot of disputes in the Beiming Imperial Court. How could I not know about it? Yang Chendong seemed to be casually nodding, but in fact, only he knew that Kuang Yi had finally begun to talk about the main topic. Yes, I heard that 20,000 soldiers and 20,000 commoners were captured. How could the Duke of Yu not be angry about such a big matter? Kuang Yi seemed to sigh. Then he continued, "I heard that even now, the Japanese warriors often appear between the Tianjin Guard and the capital. Duke of Loyalty, you're going to pass by that place. Have you met them?" Yang Chendong didn't express any dissatisfaction with Kuang Yi calling the Dai Zong Emperor Yuan. Originally, Zhu Qiyu was the Duke of Yuan. If it weren't for the change of Tu Mu, he wouldn't have become the emperor. As a follower of Zhu Qizhen, it wasn't strange that Kuang Yi didn't admit this. However, to ask about the Japanese warriors and whether he had met them was somewhat interesting. No, this duke was lucky and didn't meet them. Haha. Yes, the Duke of Loyalty's luck has always been very good. Saving Yuan, retreating from the Walla, building the bank, and so on, everything went too smoothly, right? When he uttered the last word, Kuang Ye's gaze suddenly sharpened as he looked at Yang Chendong. Feeling the coldness of a gaze, which seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, Yang Chendong didn't even lift his eyelids and smiled. Yes, the heavens are good to me. A calm and confident smile flashed across Yang Chendong's face. In Kuang Ye's eyes, all of this made him feel unreal. Kuang Yi wasn't young. In the imperial court, he was second only to Hu Xiao. He was also a man in his 60s. He had interacted with Yang Chendong many times, but even at that time, he only had a trace of respect for him. He didn't feel as powerless as he did when facing Yang Chendong. The young man in front of him was only in his early 20s, but he felt as if he was even more difficult to deal with than his father, Yang Rong. It seemed that no matter how he probed and provoked the young man was like an impenetrable wall. Under the pavilion, it suddenly became quiet. At this moment, only a gentle breeze flashed in front of them. Of course, in their hearts, they were weighing each other's words. Their chests were heavily panting, and their minds were working quickly. Ha ha, ha. The Duke of Loyalty's luck is indeed very good, and you are also very talented. This old man has seriously studied the snow of the Yang family that you rode in front of the Yang family academy. It is truly majestic and enlightening. But I don't know how to interpret the phrase, a man of great talent. Although, because of Yang Chendong, the great Ming dynasty was divided into the south, and many officials and soldiers belonged to two different imperial courts, one thing remained unchanged. That was, the poetry that scholars liked was still the same. Thinking back, when the snow of the Yang family was spread to the capital of the southern imperial court, Nanjing, it caused a huge uproar. When many people were sighing at the grandeur of this poem and were amazed by the sentences, it was inevitable that they would wonder what kind of environment and inner thoughts the author of this poem, Yang Chendong, was in to create such a song that could be passed down. There were even some people who began to research the specific meaning of the phrase, especially the phrase to count the outstanding figures. There were even more explanations for it. For example, the people of the Ying sect who were hostile to the Dai sect explained that Yang Chendong was flattering Zhu Qiyu, saying that Zhu Qiyu's ascension was justified, legitimate, and reasonable. They said that he was a man of great talent, and Zhu Qizhen was not. There were also some people who were envious, jealous, and hateful who explained that this sentence meant that Yang Chendong looked down on all scholars in the world. It was a manifestation of his own arrogance. There were also some people who wanted to see the world in chaos who said that this meant that someone wanted to replace Yang Chendong. They were implying that Yang Qindong was a traitor like Cao Cao. Among these opinions, Kuang Yi was more inclined to the latter, but he didn't say this to anyone. As the Minister of War, who knew soldiers well, was shocked when he saw the calm performance of the Cold Front soldiers on the battlefield. With such outstanding soldiers, any one of them would be qualified to be a squad leader, or even a centurion, or even a general of a higher rank. But they were willing to work under Yang Qindong. What did this mean? Chapter 339. Even though there were rumors that those people were mercenaries and that Yang Qindong was willing to spend a lot of money to hire them, Yi Qindong did not believe it. Others might believe such a reason, but Kuang Yi would never believe it no matter what. It was because he had led soldiers before and knew the importance of elite soldiers. At least in front of him, if he had such elite soldiers, he would never give them to others, even if the other party offered a high price. Not to mention, with such elite soldiers, what kind of money could he not earn? Why would he need to hire them? He had such thoughts at the beginning, but because he was indebted to someone for saving his life, he naturally could not criticize them in front of them or behind their backs. But as time passed, these elite mercenaries had been following Yang Qindong all this time, and this suspicion became heavier and heavier. What he said just now was just to test and confirm. Unfortunately, he did not get a good result, which made him a little disappointed. At the same time, he also wondered if Yi Qindong was speechless and wanted to gloss over it. While Kuang Yi was thinking about this, Yang Qindong spoke. Sir Ji, do you mind if I tell you a story? Oh, I'm all ears. Kuang Yi did not know what the other party meant, but he still smiled and agreed out of politeness. Moreover, with Yang Qindong's talent, even an ordinary story would be quite interesting in his mouth. Seeing that Kuang Yi agreed, Yang Qindong first smiled politely, then opened his mouth and said, Once upon a time, there was a scholar who wanted to go out for a walk because he was tired of studying at home. Unexpectedly, he encountered an injured man who had fainted. Out of kindness, he saved the man and found a doctor to treat him. Not long after, the man's body recovered. When he left, he said that he wanted to repay his kindness. At this point, the corners of Yang Qindong's mouth curled up slightly, giving people the feeling that he was recalling something interesting, but only he knew that he was laughing at the absurdity and nonsense of this story. It was all because this was indeed a story, a fabricated story. The man said that he wanted to repay his kindness, so of course the scholar did not care. It was just a casual effort, and he did not take it seriously. But who would have thought that not long after, the burly man would fulfill his promise? Not only did he send a lot of gold and silver, he also sent a lot of people to protect the scholar. He said that the scholar had saved his life, so seeing the scholar was like seeing himself. At this point of the story, Yang Qindong suddenly closed his mouth. After a few breaths, he said again, From then on, this scholar naturally gets whatever he wants. Now that I think about it, if it wasn't the heavens taking care of him, then what was? When the story finally came to an end, Kuang Yi fell into silence. From the beginning of the story, he thought of something. When the story came to an end, he finally understood that this so-called story was actually a fact. The scholar must be Yang Qindong, and the man he saved must be the leader of the mercenaries. If that was the case, everything made sense. This was also the main reason why the mercenaries could be used by Yang Qindong. But, is this true? If the leader of the mercenaries was so powerful, why would he appear in front of Yang Qindong in an injured state? This did not seem to make sense. Since today's story had reached this point, Kuang Yi naturally had to ask clearly, so he asked all the questions in his heart. Lord Kuang, good question. At that time, the scholar was also a little confused, but he slowly learned from the elite soldiers that the burly man he had saved had been plotted against because he was trying to snatch the position of the boss. That was why he had escaped all the way to the city where the scholar lived. Later, he recovered from his injuries and went back to take back everything. That was how simple it was. Yang Qindong spread out his hands and smiled at Kuang Yi. Since he wanted to tell a story, how could he not have thought about it from the beginning to the end? The story was not exciting, but it was still passable. At this moment, Kuang Yi did not know what to say. Should he continue to question him? But he already explained it to him. If he continued to ask, he would be accused of pestering endlessly. As expected, before Kuang Yi could continue, Yang Chendong said, "Lord Kuang, to be honest, I have never told anyone about this before. You are the first, so, if possible, I hope you can keep it a secret from me." As soon as he said this, Kuang Yi was completely speechless. The other party had put on such a sincere appearance and had even saved his life. What else could he ask? No matter what, he was still an educated person. He couldn't possibly be so shameless as to throw away his basic dignity. At this moment, the only thing he could do was nod his head and accept the favor. "Thank you for your loyalty." This old man was too rash. "Sigh, Lord Kuang, please don't say that. Everyone is curious. If it was me, I might ask too. It's fine, it's fine. Ha, drink tea, drink tea." Yang Chendong said with a laugh and put on a kind face. Outside the Chang residence, Tong Xiao aggressively led his men to surround this place, and then commanded his men to start approaching step by step. From the looks of it, it seemed that a big battle was unavoidable. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before this place would be littered with corpses. However, just when everyone was extremely nervous, the originally tightly shut door of the Chang family's courtyard suddenly opened from the inside. Then, a sturdy man appeared in front of everyone. "Prepare to charge." "Stop! All of you stop!" Tong Xiao, who was about to give the order, was ready to let the soldiers charge. However, when he saw the person who appeared, his mouth first formed in O shape, and then he shouted loudly at his men, as if he was afraid that someone would suddenly attack. The sudden shout stunned the soldiers of the great Ming dynasty, who were full of morale. At this moment, Tong Xiao had already dismounted from his horse and trotted over. When he reached the front door and saw that the person in front of him was indeed Minister Counselor Guaning, he hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. "Lord Guan, General Tong, what is the meaning of this?" After Guaning cupped his hands and bowed, he pointed at the rows of great Ming dynasty soldiers who had already appeared outside the door. This question made Tong Xiao's expression change greatly. He originally thought that there was a villain here and that the magistrate of Hangzhou had asked for help. He thought that since this was related to the Chang residents, it would be a good opportunity to take advantage of them. At that time, he could casually ask for tens of thousands of silver taels. He did not expect that Guaning would appear here. Although Guan Ying's official rank was not as high as his, he held great power. He was the kind of person who could not be offended. In particular, he had heard that Guaning was the favorite student of the current Minister of War, Kuang Yi. The city guard's office was also under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of War. When he thought of this, he broke out in a cold sweat. "What's wrong? Is the weather very hot?" "General Tong, why are you sweating so much?" Guan Ying's expression was still very serious. When he said these words, it did not seem like he was concerned, but more like he was questioning something. "This?" Tong Xiao rolled his eyes. He knew that it would be stupid to hide the truth at this time. He immediately gritted his teeth and confessed Qi Bushen. It was because Magistrate Qi of Hangzhou said that there were rebels here, so he asked me to lead the soldiers into the city to eliminate them. Rebels? Did they disturb the villagers? Did they occupy the city? Did it cause any chaos? Guaning asked one question after another. According to the regulations of the Ministry of War, if there were rebels in the city and caused great chaos, the city guard's office and the nearby city guard's office had the right to mobilize the army into the city. On the contrary, even if the local officials asked for it, they could not enter the city without permission. This was originally a way to control the army, to prevent them from doing anything out of line. Guaning asked these questions based on this basis. Guaning was doing his job according to the rules. Tong Xiao's face turned pale. At this moment, he hated Qi Bushen to death. If it wasn't for the fact that he made the situation sound very serious, and even said that there were profits to be made by entering the city, and that after the matter was over, he could just grab a few people and report to his superiors that it was a mess, and that would be the end of the matter. Then, he wouldn't have the guts to bring his army into the city. Now, not only did he not get any benefits, but he was also caught red-handed. It was conceivable that if this matter was not handled well, he would lose his official position. Although the official rank of the person in front of him was not as high as his, he was in charge of the examination. If he did not clarify the matter, he was afraid that when the person returned to the capital, he would be locked up and questioned. Since he had done something wrong, he had to accept the punishment. Tong Xiao was a straightforward person. Since he could not find a good reason, he lowered his head and said, "Lord Guan, I acted rashly and believed the words of others. I was wrong." Tong Xiao admitted his mistake so straightforwardly. A gratified smile flashed across Guan Ying's face. No matter what, it was good to know one's mistake and be able to change. Let the soldiers retreat. General Tong, please come with me. Tong Xiao thought that Guan Ying wanted to discuss the conditions with him in private. There was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He quickly agreed and let the soldiers withdraw, leaving only 2 bodyguards to wait outside. While he was still thinking about what conditions Tong Xiao would discuss with him and whether he should agree to them, the 2 of them had already arrived at the pavilion in the middle of the residence. Tong Xiao, who was about to continue apologizing, finally saw Kuang Yi, who was wearing a long gown and sitting there. When he first saw him, Tong Xiao thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He even rubbed his eyes hard. When he recognized that the other party was indeed the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, he was stunned. It would be better if Guan Ying was the only one who knew about the deployment of troops. Although Guan Ying's authority was not small, he was still an official. As long as he gave Guan Ying a way out, there would be room for negotiation. However, if the Minister of War met him, then things would be different. Guan Ying was the superior who was in charge of him. If Guan Ying's upper lip touched his lower lip, his future would be completely ruined. Chapter 340. Plop. Tong Xiao knelt down in front of Kuang Yi. The moment Tong Xiao knelt on the ground, Guan Ying walked to Kuang Ye's side and whispered the story of what had happened. Originally, Kuang Ye's expression didn't change as he sat there, but when he heard the last part of the story, his anger rose. After he heard the entire story, he was so angry that he fiercely slammed the stone table and said, "What a bunch of bastards! Where do they put the great Ming's military law?" Needless to say, he was criticizing Qi Bushen. After saying this, he looked up at Yang Qindong, and his expression returned to normal. "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I'm really sorry for making a fool of myself in front of you." Ha! Yang Qindong's lips curled into a smile. He didn't say anything. Perhaps at this moment, it wasn't appropriate to say anything. "You guys go out and wait. I will talk to the Duke of Loyalty for a while." Kuang Yi waved his hand and dismissed Guan Ying and Tong Xiao. Tong Xiao, who was nervous, bowed his head and left the courtyard. When Kuang Yi was out of sight, he carefully asked, "Lord Guan, is the Duke of Loyalty that Minister Kuang mentioned the one in the north? Well, do you know how big a mess you almost made this time?" Guan Ying nodded his head. When he spoke, the accusation in his voice became more and more obvious. In his heart, he was somewhat unconvinced by the Duke of Loyalty, especially when he saw the real person. He found that the real person was so young and did not have 3 heads and 6 arms. There was a trace of contempt in his heart. It was just that Kuang Yi was his teacher and also his superior. Even his teacher respected the other party so much, so he could not do anything against him. After receiving Guan Ying's accurate answer, cold sweat flowed down his neck. Tong Xiao had long heard of the Duke of Loyalty. This person not only saved the life of the current emperor, Yingzong, but also defeated the elite Walla army. When he thought about how he almost made such a person his opponent, a chill ran down his spine. It really scared him. Under the pavilion, after there was no one else around, Kuang Yi couldn't help but let out a long sigh. "Loyal Duke, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me. You also saw that this is our great Ming dynasty's army. What do you mean that he was bewitched by Magistrate Qi of Hangzhou? It's just that he wanted to enter the city to take advantage of us." The fact that Kuang Yi could see through the matter at a glance was enough to prove that this was not the first time something like this had happened. It also proved that his mind was clear. However, Yang Shandong still didn't reply because he knew that the other party didn't come here just for a simple meeting. There should be a deeper meaning. As for what it was, he had a rough guess. He was waiting for the other party to say it, or it could be said that he was waiting for a good price. Yang Shandong didn't say anything, but Kuang Yi didn't mind. Instead, he continued, Duke Zhongdan, to be honest, the situation in the south isn't good, especially after Zhu Huihua's rebellion caused the Miao people's chaos. Now, there's also the chaos in Guangdong. It has already affected several cities and more than a dozen counties. Oh, when did this happen? Yang Shandong had been paying attention to the situation in Guangdong. According to history, this would happen after the chaos in Guangdong. Last year's chaos in Guangdong had already been quelled, but Huang Yuliang had escaped. This time, it was the chaos in Guangdong after his father, Huang Xiaoyang. According to the records, Huang Yuliang was the first to raise his army. However, because of his arrival, Zhu Huihua rebelled first. This was somewhat different from history. I just received an urgent message this morning. As Kuang Yi spoke, he took out a memorial from his arms and handed it to Yang Shandong. Yang Shandong didn't reach out to accept Kuang Yi's kindness. Instead, he waved his hand and said, Lord Kuang, I don't need to read these. You also know that I'm Biming's subject. Now, my family, foundation, and even my wife are there. Don't harm me. AI, how can you say that? You saved the emperor's life. The earliest title of Duke Zhongdan was given by Emperor Ingzong. How can you say that you're Biming's subject? Kuang Yi looked like he was seriously trying to reason with him. Okay, Lord Kuang, there's no need to be so clear about this. This time, I'm only returning to my hometown to worship my ancestors. I really don't want to get involved in other things. Besides, Lord Kuang just said that the Great Ming Dynasty's army is mixed. I'm not an immortal, so how can I help Emperor Ingzong? Yang Shandong waved his hand, showing that he didn't want to continue the conversation. You're not an immortal, but you have a good relationship with the mercenaries. This old man has seen their elegance long ago. They're really the elites of the elites. I'm sure that with their help, the problem will be easily solved. Kuang Yi used this opportunity to finally talk about the main topic. He wanted to use the mercenaries to fight, quell the rebellion, and solve the bandit chaos in the south. This is making things difficult for me. The number of mercenaries is limited. Moreover, the money needed to hire them is a large number. Can the current imperial court take out that much money? Yang Shandong still refused, but in reality, both sides were testing each other. The Southern Ming Dynasty was a country that Zhu Qizhen had no choice but to settle for the next best thing. Because everything was forced, the resources that could be obtained were limited. The amount of gold and silver that could be taken from the national treasury was even less. Although in the past year, the situation of the imperial court was much better than when it was first established due to the wealth of the South, it was still far from being able to support two large wars. Yang Shandong said that the cost of hiring the mercenaries was too great. His Majesty really can't take out that much gold and silver. Kuang Yi lowered his head when he said this, but he quickly raised his head again. With an excited expression, he said, But isn't there the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? As long as you're willing to vouch for him, that person owes you his life. No matter what, this face has to be given. And as long as we can quell these two rebellions, the imperial court will be able to collect a lot of taxes in less than 5 years. At that time, it won't be a problem to pay the mercenaries enough money. What do you think? Yang Shandong bluntly refused. This was clearly Kuang Yi trying to gain something without risking anything. What 5 years? Who knew what would happen in 5 years? If Kuang Yi wasn't here by then, who would he ask for the money? He would never do such a strenuous and thankless job. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is a kind person. Could it be that you're just going to watch the people in the South suffer the pain of war and have their families destroyed? Otherwise, the mercenaries can send out troops and take away anything they like along the way. How about that? As he spoke, Kuang Yi finally revealed a part of his trump card. Speaking of which, after the Ming Dynasty experienced the rule of Renxian, the people were still very rich, especially the aristocratic families and those rich businessmen. There were many priceless antiques, calligraphy, and paintings among them. They were existences like treasures. If they were destroyed during the war, they would really be destroyed. Those that weren't destroyed would be priceless in the future. What Ryukyu Island lacked the most right now was people. What the Great Ming Dynasty had the most was people. If they could take the opportunity to snatch some people back, it would be a great advantage. Speaking of calligraphy and paintings, Yang Shandong had thought more than once about opening a huge museum and putting all the good things inside for future generations to admire and observe. He wanted to feel the deep heritage of this country that had thousands of years of civilization. Kuan Ye's words could be considered to have scratched his itch. Even so, Yang Shandong still didn't agree immediately. Lord Kuang, it's not like that. I just saved his life, and he was willing to send people to protect my life and safety. That's all. If I ask for more, I'll be asking for a yard after taking an inch. Outside the Chong family's courtyard, a luxurious carriage drove out of the mansion and went straight to the Hangzhou government office in the city. Kuang Yi sat in the carriage, and there was some disappointment on his face. He had already tried his best to persuade Yang Shandong. This was also Ing Zong's intention. However, who would have thought that the other party still didn't agree? At the end of their conversation, when he asked if he could arrange for some young Ming generals to go to the mercenary camp for training, Yang Shandong directly rejected him with the reason that the base was a secret place. This kind of behavior that didn't give him any face at all gave Kuang Yi a headache. He thought that he had already shown all his cards, but the other party still didn't take them. What else could he do? The good thing was that business was business, and personal relationships were personal. Yang Shandong had a good impression of him. For his sake, not only did he return Yo Ji and the others who had caused trouble at the Chong family's courtyard, he even sent him out in his own carriage. This was already a great show of respect. Sai, this Duke of Loyalty seems young, but he does things like an old fox. Even if he rejected you, he couldn't get angry. This is also a kind of ability. In the luxurious carriage, a pair of wrinkled old hands touched the luxurious decorations in the carriage. Kuang Yi couldn't help but sigh. Whoosh! A whistling arrow suddenly whistled in the air. Then there was a burst of chaos outside, followed by the voices of Guan Ying and Tong Qiao. Protect the Lord and catch the assassins. The chaos outside didn't last long. After a series of weapons clashing, it gradually came to an end. Then, Guan Ying's voice came from outside the carriage. Lord, most of the assassins have been killed. Only one escaped, and there are still 2 alive. They said that they were here to assassinate the Duke of Loyalty. Assassinate the Duke of Loyalty? Why did they find me? Before he could finish his sentence, Kuang Yi suddenly realized that he was in the luxurious carriage that Yang Shandong usually rode in. He immediately laughed bitterly and said, Sai, I really don't know if they have good intentions or if they did it knowingly. Chapter 341. My lord, what should we do? Guan Ying, who was outside, naturally did not hear Kuang Ye's muttering. He was still asking for instructions on what to do next. Forget it. Send him to the Duke of Loyalty. Let him deal with him as he sees fit. Kuang Yi lost interest. He did not even bother to ask who was trying to assassinate Yang Shandong. In his opinion, he was young and had power and honor. However, he did not know how to follow good advice. It was normal for such a person to attract assassins. Besides, if he were to poke his nose into other people's business, there was no guarantee that Yang Shandong would not have other thoughts. Since that was the case, he might as well hand the person over and earn a favor. After a short period of chaos, the carriages continued on their way to the Hangzhou government office. At the side door of the Qi residence, which was not far away from the government office, a figure climbed over the wall and quietly entered the Qi residence. The person seemed to be very familiar with the layout of the Qi residence. After a few twists and turns, he arrived at a quiet courtyard. Then, he opened a door, causing a creaking sound to be heard as the door opened. As soon as the sound was heard, a scolding sound came from the wooden bed inside the door. Why are you only here now? I'm bored to death here. and the beauties you found. Just as he finished speaking, there was suddenly no sound. Then, the person spoke in a nervous and fearful voice. Who are you? What do you want? Why are you here? I'm telling you, don't come near me. Otherwise, I know martial arts. I'll take care of you. Ouch. Before he could finish his sentence, the person who spoke was already restrained. A sharp dagger was placed on his neck. It looked like he would bleed if the dagger went any deeper. I'm not a bad person. Please don't kill me. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. I have money. I have a lot of money. Chi Ching's face turned pale, and his voice trembled. Spare me. Spare me. I'm not a bad person. Please don't kill me. The person who spoke was Chi Ching. After being dealt with by Yang Qindong yesterday, he returned to the Qi residence to recuperate. However, he was not a good person to begin with. Even when he was recuperating, he did not stop. He ordered 2 of his followers to go out and find women for him. Just now, he thought that his subordinates had returned. Unexpectedly, it was an assassin. Moreover, the assassin's skills were not bad. He was subdued in just one move. I don't want your money. I'm here to give you credit. There was no killing intent in the person's voice. Instead, he spoke in a calm manner. Come, let me introduce myself. My name is Wu Yong. You must not have heard of my name, but it doesn't matter. Someone knows me, and he wants my life. I've also heard about you. The reason why I'm looking for you is because we have a common enemy. Do you understand now? Listening to the unhurried introduction of everything, Chi Ching's initial confusion turned into his eyes shining as he nodded his head excitedly. At the Hangzhou government office, knowing that the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, had personally come, the magistrate, Qi Busin, brought a group of his colleagues to welcome him. The other officials naturally respected and feared Kuang Yi, especially when they had done something wrong. They felt uneasy. However, as the magistrate of Hangzhou, the boss here, Qi Busin, did not panic. After all, he was someone with a backer. His brother-in-law was the current Minister of Rights, Liu De. Speaking of Liu De, his strength was not to be underestimated. In the southern Ming dynasty, Yingzong could not return to the capital after his defeat in the Tumu War. He listened to Yang Qindong's suggestion and split the great Ming dynasty into 2. He came to Nanjing and established the southern Ming dynasty. Since it was an imperial court, it needed the help of hundreds of officials. Zhu Qijin made the same choice as Baiming, which was to remove the cabinet and let the 6 ministries' minister take the lead and directly answer to the emperor. In other words, Zhu Qijin and Zhu Qiyu made the same choice. They both wanted to centralize power. After establishing the southern Ming dynasty, the first people to be appointed were the ministers of the 6 ministries. Among them, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhuo, and the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, were restored to their positions. As for the others, Chun Sun, who had come from a northern capital, became the Minister of Personnel, Xiao Chua became the Minister of Punishments, Jiang Yuan became the Minister of Works, Shang Lu became the Imperial Censor, and Yin Xian became the Envoy of Transmission. These people all had one thing in common, which was that they were all officials from the capital. However, only the Minister of Rights, Liu De, was appointed. Speaking of which, as the capital of Nanjing, there were 6 ministries in politics, and there was also the existence of the Minister of State. They were in charge of the affairs in the south. The only difference was that their position was half a rank lower than that of the minister of the northern Ming dynasty. It was this half a rank difference that caused the ministers of the southern Ming dynasty to be moved. However, only Liu De remained and was promoted half a rank, becoming the Minister of Rights of the southern Ming dynasty. Merely from this point alone, one could tell that this person was very capable and had very powerful methods. Liu De was a great Confucian scholar and held a very strong position in the eyes of the scholars in the southern Ming dynasty. In addition, he was a slick and sly person, and the Liu family was one of the top aristocratic families in the south. That was why he was the only candidate for the position of Minister of Rights in the entire south. Ever since he was promoted to Minister of Rights, he had become the leader of the southern officials. It was said that in the imperial court, even Zhu Qijin had to give him some face in many matters. Qi Bushin's backer was none other than Lu De. This was also the reason why he was so fearless. He also knew that Kuang Yi and Lu De had a good relationship. Since that was the case, he had nothing to be afraid of. Sure enough, when Kuang Yi arrived, he only reprimanded him a few times, and the matter was over. Seeing all this, the other Hangzhou officials began to re-evaluate the position of their magistrate in their hearts. Kuang Yi saw all of this, but he did not want to do this. As for the magistrate who dared to ask the Hangzhou guards to help him take revenge, he wanted to directly remove him from his position and even arrest him in prison. However, he could only think about it. His brother-in-law was Lu De, and he could not do anything to such a person. He was only the minister of war. If he wanted to do anything to a magistrate, he had to get the emperor's approval. With Lu De around, this matter could not be done. Since he knew that it could not be done, why did he have to do something like this? Not to mention that his main focus was now on the two rebellions in the southern Ming dynasty. He did not have the leisure to fight. After Qi Bushin was reprimanded a few times, the matter was over. Out of gratitude, he invited Kuang Yi to attend his family's banquet. With regards to this, Kuang Yi could not help but agree. Since he wanted the other party to be indebted to him, he naturally had to put on a show and agree to it. Thus, the entire Qi residence was decorated with decorations, and it looked very lively. While the banquet was still being prepared, Qi Qing in the Qi mansion was also ready. His two attendants escorted the only assassin who escaped during the day, Wu Yong, to the Chang family's residence. During the day, Wu Yong made a mistake in assassinating Yang Qindong and mistakenly ambushed the Minister of War, Kuang Yi. After the matter was exposed and Wu Yong escaped alone, he knew that there was not much chance for him to avenge his elder brother and third brother. The money he brought out from the capital was all used to hire assassins, but they were all killed by Kuang Yi's subordinates. Now, he did not have the ability to organize a second large-scale assassination. In such a situation, he decided to take a risk, or it could be said that he was going to take a risk. Thus, he came to the Qi mansion, found Qi Qing, and told him his plan. It was to send him to Yang Qindong on the pretext that the other party caught him to take credit. As long as he sent him over, he could assassinate him at close range. In this way, he could kill Yang Qindong for revenge and would not have to take any responsibility. Qi Qing was naturally satisfied with this plan and agreed. Qi Qing thought that even if Wu Yong failed the assassination, it would have nothing to do with him. In fact, he would have the credit of catching him and sending him over. On the other hand, if Yang Qindong died, Wu Yong would be killed as well. In this way, it would have nothing to do with him. Why wouldn't he be happy to do this kind of thing where he was the good guy? After sending Wu Yong out, he just waited for the good news in the mansion. Back to the Chang family's residence. Wu Yong was actually captured and sent over alive. Yang Wu, who was in charge of security, personally received Qi Qing's two attendants. According to them, Wu Yong had intended to assassinate Qi Qing in order to frame the Duke of Zhongdan. However, Qi Qing's title of Hangzhou Divine Fist was not for nothing. He had unexpectedly counterattacked. After figuring out Wu Yong's identity, he had sent Wu Yong away. He said that everything that had happened in Xinglong restaurant was a misunderstanding. Wu Yong's action was to clear up the misunderstanding and mend their relationship. Of course, all of this was Wu Yong's idea. The two attendants listened to their master Qi Qing's words and came to take credit. After Yang Wu asked everything, he asked the two attendants to wait for a while. He would report this to the Duke of Zhongdan. At that time, they would be rewarded. Wu Yong was tied up tightly and searched from head to toe. After confirming that there was no threat on him, he was sent to the inner courtyard under the escort of Tu Long Feng. Yang Qindong, who had heard the news, was already on his way here. Wu Yong was once the second in command of the Blackwater Gang. When the Blackwater Gang was destroyed, this person escaped. Then, he tried to assassinate him again and again, which made Yang Qindong a little angry. Originally, he thought that since this person was famous for his strategy, it would not be easy to catch him. He did not expect that he would be sent to his door. Yang Qindong certainly wanted to take a good look at this person and see how smart he was and what kind of ability he had. In the side hall of the backyard, Wu Yong was forced to kneel on the ground by Tu Lung Feng. Then the door curtain was lifted and Yang Chendong, dressed in green, strode out. Chapter 342. The moment Yang Chendong appeared, the kneeling Wu Yong struggled with all his might. He glared furiously at Yang Chendong, as though he wanted to kill someone with his gaze. Oof. You're about to die, yet you're still so stubborn. Come on, let him speak. I'd like to see what he can do, Yang Chendong said coldly as he looked at Wu Yong, whose mouth was gagged with a white cloth. This Wu Yong had tried to assassinate him time and time again, especially the last time in the capital. If he hadn't found that lousy team member Yunb and let the cat out of the bag, Wu Yong would have suffered a small loss. Today, Quan Yi had caused him to suffer. Now that he had finally captured him, Wu Yong wanted to see what tricks he could play. Upon hearing Yang Chendong's order, the Lung Feng soldier in charge of watching over Wu Yong reached out to pull off the white cloth. At this time, a conspiratorial smile flashed in Wu Yong's eyes. Although it only flashed in his eyes, it was still seen by Yang Chendong, who was staring at him. Instinctively sensing that something was wrong, Yang Chendong suddenly shouted, "Don't let him open his mouth." Before he could finish speaking, the Lung Feng soldier in charge of watching over Wu Yong had already pulled off the white cloth. However, upon hearing the new order, he instinctively reached out to gag his mouth again. At this moment, a thin silver needle suddenly shot out from his mouth. Due to the Lung Feng soldier's obstruction, the needle that was supposed to be aimed at Yang Chendong instead pierced into his right arm. Ugh! With a suppressed cry of pain, the member of Cold Vanguard staggered and fell to the ground. Tiger's Mane reacted quickly and reached out to support him. Concerned, he asked what was wrong and reached for the injured Lung Feng soldier's arm with his right hand. "Lu Ping, what happened?" Yang Wu, who was standing behind Wu Yong, saw the sudden change in front of him. He stretched out his leg and kicked Wu Yong. With just one kick, Wu Yong's body bent over. It was obvious that this kick was not light. At this moment, Tiger's Mane, who was inspecting the injury on Lu Ping's arm, said, "It's poison. His entire arm is turned black. It looks like he'll have to amputate it if he wants to stay alive." As he spoke, he raised his head to look at young Master Yang Chendong, who was watching everything unfold. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with reluctance, but he quickly asked calmly, "Lu Ping, for your safety, your right arm has to be cut off to save your life." Lung Feng, who was called Lu Ping, was a very ordinary-looking young man. Judging from his looks, he was probably not even 20 years old. At this moment, due to the poison acting up, his head was covered in layers of cold sweat and his expression was one of extreme pain. However, when Yang Chendong asked him, he still replied in a clear voice, "Sixth young master, please do it. I'm not afraid of pain. It's just that I won't be able to be a proud member of the Lung Feng soldier in the future. It's not a problem. Even if you lose your right arm, you still have your left arm. You can still do many things. There are many positions in Crimson City that are suitable for you. As long as you're a talent, you won't be buried." After hearing these words, Yang Chendong endured the pain in his heart and stepped forward to pat Lu Ping's left shoulder. Then, with an extremely firm tone, he said to Tiger's Mane, "Do it. Do it quickly. Young master, don't worry." Tiger's Mane's eyes were also a little red. After receiving the order, Beta Persei handed over a sharp short knife and a bowl of strong liquor. After receiving the white wine, Lu Ping tilted his head back and poured it into his mouth. Then, with a burst of force, he sprayed the highly concentrated white wine onto the short knife. Following the lifting and lowering of the blade, Lu Ping's right arm, which had already turned light black, neatly fell off from his shoulder. The other Lung Feng members hurriedly went forward and carried the unconscious Lu Ping to the back for treatment. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, Yang Chendong, and Wu Yong were left in the side hall. "Young master, it's my fault. I didn't check thoroughly." Yang Wu, who had sent Wu Yong here, had already lowered his head. He had checked Wu Yong's entire body. Only his mouth was not touched because it was sealed shut by the people who sent him here. In the end, it almost caused a huge disaster. Remember, if something like this happens again in the future, remove your mouth. Yang Qindong waved his hand and waved the kneeling Yang Wu away. Then, he strode forward and personally grabbed Wu Yang's chin and dislocated it. After doing all this, he personally reached out and removed the white cloth from Wu Yang's mouth. Then, he said in a voice full of murderous intent, "You're very good. You dare to play tricks under the young master's nose. Unfortunately, you still didn't get what you wanted. On the contrary, in the following time, you'll understand what it means to beg for death, but not be able to beg for life." Killing people was nothing more than a nod of the head. But this time, he had seriously injured one of the Lung Feng brothers. Hearing him say that he could no longer be the proud member of the Lung Feng team in the future, Yang Qindong felt his heart bleeding. This was far more painful than being cut by a knife. Since others made him suffer, of course he wouldn't let them have it easy. As for the matter of killing people being nothing more than a nod of the head, he directly threw it to the back of his mind. "Yang Wu, I'll leave this person to you. I can use any method to deal with him, but remember, he can't die so quickly. At least, he can't die before we've used up all of our methods, understand? Young master, don't worry. Yang Wu knows what to do." Wu Yong, whose eyes were already filled with fear, was dragged down. Perhaps he knew what kind of fate awaited him, but he actually struggled madly. At the same time, he looked at Yang Qindong as if there were thousands of words in his eyes. Perhaps he would say, "If you want to kill, then kill. Let's have a good time," etc. However, Yang Qindong was no longer interested in listening to all of this. He only knew that this matter had angered him. If he didn't vent his anger, he was afraid that he would suffocate to death. Investigate? What's going on? Interrogate the people who sent him here as well. We need to get the results as soon as possible. Yang Qindong stood upright with his hands behind his back. When he spoke, a murderous aura naturally spread out with him as the center. Tiger's Mane, Beta, Persei, and Yang Wu at the side didn't dare to be negligent. They turned around and left. Soon, the two attendants of Qi Qing who had sent Wu Yong here were crying for their parents. After a while, Tiger's Mane returned, but the news he brought back was not very good. "Young master, those two people didn't know. When they saw Wu Yong, he was already tied up. Then Qi Qing arranged for them to send him here. No evidence." Yang Qindong nodded gently. "Forget it. Since there's no evidence, then there's no need for evidence. Gather the men and follow me to the Qi residence to arrest him." When he said this, Yang Qindong's expression had already calmed down. For others, it was simply impossible to go to the local magistrate's residence to arrest someone without any evidence. However, when it came to Yang Qindong, everything became possible. As Liu Ping said, the members of the Coal Vanguard team should be proud. If such a proud person suffered a big loss, as the master, if he couldn't get back at them, then he wouldn't be able to lead them in the future. The Qi residence. The banquet continued. Perhaps it was because Hangzhou cuisine was originally relatively light, or perhaps it was because of Kuang Ye's presence. This banquet didn't have many toasts. For Qi Bushen, Kuang Ye's presence was already enough to explain everything. At least, everything else was secondary. Therefore, he didn't drink too much during the banquet. He only toasted Kuang Yi 3 times, and that was it. The banquet wasn't lively, but just as it was about to end, it suddenly became lively. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the Qi residence. Then, there was the sound of the main door crashing to the ground, followed by the sound of footsteps. "What's going on?" Qi Bushen, who was sitting in the banquet, heard the commotion outside, and his eyes immediately darkened. The Minister of War was in his residence today. Who was so blind to make a scene? It was really embarrassing for him. When the housekeeper saw that his master was angry, he had already turned around and walked out. However, before he could figure out what was going on, he saw a black shadow appear in front of him. Then, he felt a pain in his stomach and was sent flying. With a plop, he flew 3 to 4 meters in the air and landed in the main hall where the banquet was being held. The commotion outside had already attracted everyone's attention. Suddenly, the housekeeper of the Qi residence was kicked back into the main hall. Out of instinct, Guaning and Tong Qiao both stood up from their seats. The guards behind them also drew their steel swords. Bang! A sudden gunshot rang out and hit the roof of the main hall. This shot caused the guards who wanted to rush out to stop in their tracks. Everyone was panicking at this moment, except for Kuang Yi, who was still sitting in his seat. He only raised his head to look out the window the moment the gunshot was heard. The person who fired the shot was Yang Chendong. When the gunshot rang out, he had already strode into the banquet hall. At this moment, his gaze met Kuang Yi's. Then, a smile appeared on his originally calm face. "Lord Qi, I'm sorry to have disturbed your refined mood. It's just that I had no choice but to come here today, because..." He suddenly pointed his gun at Magistrate Qi Bushen, who was sitting at the host's seat. "Because someone wanted to kill me and almost succeeded. I have no choice but to seek an explanation for this matter." Yang Chendong's sudden action caused the originally noisy hall to instantly quieten down. Qi Bushen, who had already stood up and wanted to criticize Yang Chendong, fell back into his chair with a plop. Then, his face turned pale and his expression changed drastically. Qi Bushen was studious when he was young. He was indeed proficient in the teachings of Confucius and Mencius. Usually, official words came out of his mouth as soon as he opened it. Occasionally, when he spoke about righteous matters, he would be impassioned and make people urinate. However, all of this was based on a theoretical foundation. When faced with a choice of life and death, his mind was already blank. At this moment, he was not thinking about the principles of the saints. He was thinking about whether the gun could shoot bullets and whether it could really kill him. Chapter 343. Yang Chendong's action made Commander Tong Qiao, who was about to speak, swallow his words. Compared to the other guards, the Hangzhou city guard was slightly higher. He had long heard of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. He had heard that not long ago, Baiming's Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwei, had been dragged down by this person and his entire clan had been implicated. Such a ruthless person was not someone a rank 3 general could afford to offend. Guaning, on the other hand, took a step forward when the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became heavy. When no one spoke, his expression didn't change. "Duke of Loyalty and Courage? What are you doing? Please understand the situation. This is the Southern Ming Dynasty's Hangzhou, not Baiming's capital. It is also not your Yang family village or Chang family villa. Lord Qi is the prefect of Hangzhou and a rank 4 official personally appointed by the emperor. He is..." This duke did not say that I wanted to kill him, but his younger cousin wanted to plot against me. Fortunately, the mercenaries reacted quickly and did not let the other party succeed. However, because of this, he lost an arm. Qi Qing must give an explanation for this matter. "Tiger's Mane, take the thing out." Yang Chendong signaled to Tiger's Mane behind him as he spoke. Tiger's Mane nodded and placed the severed arm on the table. The entire arm was still slightly black. At the same time, it could be seen that the camouflage uniform was wrapped around the arm. When he saw this, Kuang Yi, who had been silent all this while, finally had a change in expression. He suddenly thought of something and couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up and asked, "Duke Zhongdan, is that brother's life in danger?" "His life is not in danger, but his entire right arm is completely gone." Yang Chendong faced Kuang Yi. When he said these words, his voice was clearly suppressed. "It's good that he is fine." When Kuang Yi heard that the mercenaries' lives were not in danger, he could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. This time, he had only left the capital to do 2 things. First, it was official business. That was to patrol the various guard stations in the south. This was so that when they really needed an army, they would be able to pull them out and have enough fighting power. The second matter was the secret edict that the emperor had just issued. It was to persuade Yang Chendong to let the mercenaries behind him work for him. At this moment, if the mercenary brothers were to lose their lives, it would be even more difficult to discuss the cooperation. Fortunately, he had only lost an arm, so he was still safe. This way he could be at ease. Of course, this kind of relief was only in his heart. Seeing Yang Chendong appear with a murderous aura and take out a broken arm, he knew that if he did not give an explanation, not to mention the anger of the Duke of Loyalty, at the very least, there was no need to discuss the matter of cooperation. As a Minister of War and an important official of the Imperial Court, Kuang Yi had seen a lot of storms and reacted quickly. After figuring out the key point, his expression changed immediately. "Magistrate Qi, what is going on?" All of a sudden, he changed the topic and asked Qi Bushen. Many people were stunned on the spot. With such a change in attitude, many people who thought they were smart instantly understood what was going on. Minister Kuang had questioned Qi Bushen for the sake of the Duke of Loyalty. Even though he knew that Qi Bushen had the background of the Minister of Rights, Luda, he still did it without hesitation. It seemed that the rumors were true. Kuang Yi owed the Duke of Loyalty a life-saving grace and was now repaying him. Qi Bushen also thought the same. He looked at Kuang Yi with a bitter expression and said, "Lord Kuang, I really don't know what happened. Why would the Duke of Loyalty question me like this? Could it be a misunderstanding?" "Misunderstanding? Do you know who the Duke of Loyalty is? How could he misunderstand you? Since you don't know, why don't you ask your cousin to come out and explain it to us face to face?" Kuang Yi didn't look at other people's expressions and didn't have time to figure out what they were thinking. He only knew that a mercenary was injured in front of him. If he couldn't give a suitable explanation, it would be impossible for him to cooperate with the other party. For the sake of the country, for the peace of the South, and for the South Ming to have the capital to contend with Baiming, not to mention a fourth-rank magistrate. Even if Minister Luda was here, he would sacrifice himself when necessary. Perhaps no one except Yang Chendong could understand Kuang Yi's thoughts at this moment. Qi Bushen didn't understand, so he was a little conflicted about calling his cousin out. But in front of Shangguan, he couldn't say anything to refuse. He just stood there and didn't say anything. He just wanted to use this method to resist. Once Kuang Yi's anger dissipated, perhaps there would be a chance to save the situation. Qi Bushen thought himself clever and didn't say a word. Yang Chendong saw through his thoughts and smiled coldly. "Oh, it seems that I've made a mistake. Since that's the case, I'll take my leave. Sorry for the disturbance. Ha!" After saying this with a faint smile, Yang Chendong prepared to turn and leave. However, before he could take a step, Kuang Yi's voice rang out. "Qi Bushen, I told you to find my cousin, but you didn't hear me. Guaning, bring some men to the back residence and find him." Kuang Yi actually ordered a search of the residence. This was tantamount to falling out completely. Although it didn't matter if he offended a small fry like Qi Bushen, what would the Minister of Rights, Luda, think? How would he deal with him when they met in the Imperial Court? Not to mention, the two of them had a good personal relationship. Why would he do this? Wouldn't there be no room for negotiation? At this moment, Tong Qiao, the commander of the Hangzhou City Guards, and Guaning were stunned. Even the prefectural magistrate, Qi Bushen, was shocked. Only Yang Chendong stood there with a faint smile on his face. He already had a plan for what he would face today. From the looks of it now, everything that had developed was going according to his imagination. It seemed that the Southern Ming Empire had indeed encountered a big problem this time. The other party's intention to invite him and the mercenaries to come out of seclusion was obvious. Lu Ping's right arm was completely crippled. It was impossible to say that Yang Chendong wasn't angry. However, if he wanted to take revenge, there were many ways. For example, he could secretly kidnap Lu Ping, or let the members of the Cold Blade Division pretend to be bandits and rush into the Qi residence to kidnap Lu Ping. No matter which method it was far better than openly denouncing him like this. However, he didn't have a choice. He wanted to see how Kuang Yi would deal with it and where his bottom line was. Only by probing him would he be able to make more practical demands in the negotiation process to satisfy Yang Xie's development. Kuang Yi's performance didn't disappoint Yang Chendong. At least he knew that the other party was sincere. Since this was the case, many things would be much easier to handle. Guaning, who was called out, didn't understand why Minister Kuang Yi was so angry. However, since it was an order, as a subordinate, he had to obey. Immediately, he pointed at a few of his guards and led them to the backyard of the Qi residence. During this process, Chibu Shun really wanted to step forward and stop them, but when he saw the dark expression on Kuang Ye's face, Tong Xiao staring at him, and Yang Qindong standing there calmly, he didn't do anything to stop them. He had just tricked Tong Xiao and almost caused him to lose his official position. He must be holding a grudge in his heart. If he dared to openly disobey Kuang Ye's orders, Tong Xiao would be the first to jump out and teach him a lesson. It was also equivalent to performing well. The situation was stronger than the person. Not to mention the Duke of Loyal Courage, who was staring at him like a tiger watching its prey. That person had a flintlock in his hand. It was said that when he was angry, he even dealt with the Minister of Justice of the Northern Ming Dynasty. Moreover, the Minister of Justice was the trusted aide of the Emperor. He was just a magistrate. How could he withstand it? Chi Busen stood there tactfully and didn't speak. Time passed quietly like this. After a while, a roaring voice came from the backyard. "What are you doing? Who are you? Let me tell you, this is the Qi residence. I want to see my cousin. I want to see the magistrate. Don't shout, or I will teach you a lesson. As for the person you want to see, you will see him soon." Guan Ying's voice came from afar. Then, Qi Qing, who was tied up, appeared in the front yard in front of everyone's eyes. Qi Qing's hair was disheveled, and there was an obvious footprint on his chest. It was obvious that he had been kicked when he resisted just now. Normally, he wouldn't even dare to imagine such a thing. His cousin was the magistrate of Hangzhou. As the saying goes, even if you don't respect the monk, you still have to respect the Buddha. Who in Hangzhou would dare to treat him like this? But today, such a scene actually happened. He couldn't help but feel as if he was in a dream. When he entered the front yard and saw Qi Busen, Qi Qing, who was known as the Hangzhou Divine Fist, cried bitterly and shouted as if he had been greatly wronged. "Cousin, save me, save me. Don't panic. I am the magistrate. I won't let anyone wrong you." At this moment, Qi Busen had returned to his original official appearance. He finally understood what was going on. If he really allowed someone to take Qi Qing away in front of him, he wouldn't be able to keep his position as the magistrate anymore. If he couldn't even protect his family, who would be loyal to him? A person's life was just a thin layer of skin. For this face, even if he had to face Kuang Yi, the minister, he had to do it. Presumably, once this matter spread out, his brother-in-law, Lu De, who was in the capital of Nanjing, would understand what he was doing now. Chapter 344. After comforting his cousin, Chibu Shun walked up to Yang Qindong and said, "Duke Zhongdan, this is my Qi mansion. What are you trying to do?" Bang! He was answered by a loud gunshot. It was just a gunshot, but it was so loud and sudden that it was completely out of Chibu Shun's expectations. He instinctively took 2 steps back, as if he was really afraid of being hit by the gun. "Ha!" Yang Qindong laughed heartily when he saw that Chibu Shun had been scared away by his spear. His gaze then landed on Qi Qing, who had been brought out. He spat out 5 words in a cold voice. "Bring him here." Among the mercenaries, a man whose expression had changed greatly was pushed out from the crowd. As soon as he appeared, he attracted everyone's attention, but he didn't have any self-awareness. He didn't even look at anyone. He just pointed at Qi Qing and said, "It's him." He teamed up with the second brother of the Blackwater gang, Wu Yong. He wanted to get close to the loyal duke and assassinate him. All of this was arranged by him. I was just following orders. The man who stood out was one of the 2 followers sent by Qi Qing. As for why he was the only one left, it was naturally because the other person had been killed because he refused to cooperate. This scene had happened right before his eyes. In order to save his own life, he would naturally say whatever Yang Wu wanted him to say at this moment. The sudden accusation made Qi Qing, who was being held down, change his expression greatly, and he was even more confused. Only Wu Yong and himself knew about this matter. Unless it was the other party's testimony, he would not believe anyone else's words. At this moment, he kept denying it. "No, it's not like this. It's not like this. He wronged me." As far as Yang Qindong was concerned, Lu Ping's broken arm must be avenged. The accusation was just a formality. Even if there was no such accusation, would he let Qi Qing off? The answer was, of course, impossible. Since that was the case, why would he be polite? As if he did not hear Qi Qing's shouts, he looked at Kuang Yi and said, "Sir Kuang, the witness is here. Can I take him away?" Kuang Yi's expression was a little unnatural. Naturally, he could tell that it was a little far-fetched to want to pin Qi Qing down with just one witness. However, he also knew that if he didn't vent his anger, the so-called cooperation with the mercenaries would be impossible. For the bigger picture and for the country, sacrifice was a must. He immediately nodded. "Yes, there's a witness here. Duke of Loyalty, you can take Qi Qing away for questioning, but how to deal with him will be handed over to the Yamen or the Ministry of Justice." Kuang Yi agreed to Yang Qindong's request to take him away, but at the same time, he also left some leeway. Naturally, he didn't want to offend the mercenaries, but he also didn't want to offend Lu De. At the very least, before he received the benefits from Yang Qindong, he would not easily make preparations to side with one side. When Qi Busen heard Kuang Yi say that he could take them away, he wanted to refute. However, when he heard the last sentence, he quickly shut his mouth. Minister Kuang had left him some face. As long as Qi Qing's matter was handed over to the Yamen or the Ministry of Justice, he believed that with his connections, Qi Busen would definitely be able to protect him. Qi Busen was happy, and so was Yang Qindong. After laughing a few times, he took 2 big steps forward and whispered something in Kuang Yi's ear. With this sentence, Kuang Yi's originally very serious face instantly became much better. Just as Kuang Yi's expression became better, and Qi Busen felt that something was wrong, a gunshot rang out again. Bang! The sound reverberated throughout the front yard. As the gunshot rang out, a bloody hole appeared on Qi Qing's forehead. Then, his eyes became blurry, and he fell to the ground with a plop. At this moment, he couldn't be more dead. Yang Qindong was the one who fired the shot. Just as Kuang Yi's expression became happy, he had already fired the shot. While everyone was still in shock over this sudden turn of events, he had already put away his Type 54 pistol, turned around, and walked out of the Qi Mansion's main gate. As he walked, his voice could be heard. "I'm really sorry. It went off by accident." Haha. Yang Qindong left just like that. He had suddenly barged in, arrested, and killed someone. It seemed that this series of events had been premeditated and had caught everyone off guard. Qi Busen was stunned for a full 2 breaths. Suddenly, his eyes burned with anger as he looked at Yang Qindong's departing back. He shouted loudly, "Men, arrest this murderer for this official. Let's see who dares." Almost as soon as Qi Bushen's voice fell, Kuang Yi's voice also rang out. The Qi Mansion's guards, who were about to make a move, were stunned when they heard Minister Kuang's words. Then, before they could react, Guaning had already led a group of men to block the Qi Mansion's gate to the outside world. Their actions seemed to be saying that no one could leave at will without Minister Kuang's order. "Kuang Yi, what are you doing?" Qi Busen, who was burning with anger, had lost his composure at this time. In his anger, he actually shouted Minister Kuang's full name. However, Kuang Yi was not angry about this. He could understand Qi Bushen's feelings at this moment and even understand the anger in his heart. However, if he had a choice, he would still let Yang Qindong go. All of this was not only because the other party had saved his life, but also because of a more important point. Earlier, the Duke of Loyalty had clearly said to him, "We can discuss the matter of hiring mercenaries. You can come to the mansion tomorrow to have a chat." Kuang Yi could finally let go of the stone that had been hanging high in his heart. At this time, how could he allow anything to happen to Yang Qindong? Not to mention that the one who died was Qi Qing. Even if Qi Busen was killed by Yang Qindong, he would not arrest him on the spot. Instead, he would send someone to report the matter to Ing Zong before making a decision. After all, everything was for the sake of the big picture. For the sake of the big picture, it was worth it to make some sacrifices. Seeing that Qi Busen had shouted his full name, Kuang Yi gently shook his head. "Magistrate Qi, have a good night's rest. When your emotions have stabilized, we can talk again. As for what happened today, I will personally write a letter to Minister Liu and tell him the whole story." After saying this, Kuang Yi turned to the Hangzhou City Guard commander, Tong Xiao, who seemed to be scared silly, and said, "You stay and comfort Magistrate Liu. Before this matter is settled, the people of the Qi mansion should not go out casually." This meant that he wanted to keep an eye on Qi Bus Hen. After understanding this, Tong Xiao immediately nodded and said respectfully, "Please rest assured, Your Excellency." Yang Qindong and Kuang Yi left, leaving Qi Qing's body on the ground and the Hangzhou City Magistrate Qi Bus Hen, who was in pain. The Qi Mansion's courtyard was impenetrable from the inside to the outside. Not even a bird could come out. This was the effect of power. The fist was the absolute truth. Yang Qindong and the others left the Qi Mansion. Tiger's Mane was carefully observing the surrounding movements, especially behind him. Beta Persei had taken the initiative to take over the task. Together with Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, they loaded their guns and waited for a possible counterattack. "Everyone, rest assured, as long as they are not stupid, no one will come looking for trouble. Let's go back to the courtyard and have a good rest. I'm afraid we have something to discuss tomorrow." Yang Qindong stretched and entered the iconic luxurious carriage. Not long after, the sound of snoring could be heard from the carriage. Just as Yang Qindong had said, the next morning, just after breakfast, Kuang Yi brought Guan Ying to the Chong family's courtyard for the second time. Kuang Ye's impatience was not in line with the style of discussing important matters. Based on experience, the person who lost their cool first would be the one who would pay the most in the negotiation. Yang Qindong could understand Kuang Ye's desire to hire the mercenaries for help, but he did not expect him to be so impatient. When the two of them sat down, Kuang Yi said, "Zhu Huichen's matter has blown up. Jiaoji has sent troops." Smart people understood what was going on. Yang Qindong was startled when he heard this. Then, he nodded with a serious expression. "I see. Since that's the case, let's get straight to the point. I can talk to the mercenaries, but the imperial court must give you generous conditions. Also, you need to talk to the Daizong. To be honest, my two wives have many properties in the capital in the north. If the arrangements there are not clear, I won't help either." The imperial court of the Southern Ming dynasty was well aware of the Daizong's attitude toward Yang Qindong. It was truly a case of using and guarding. Otherwise, Yang Qindong would not be unable to bring his family back when he wanted to go back to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. If the Southern Ming dynasty wanted Yang Qindong to help, they had to get Bai Ming's permission. Kuan Yin thought about this very clearly last night. Therefore, when Yang Qindong made the request, he readily agreed. "Duke of Loyalty, please rest assured. Since you want to help us, how can we let you worry about trivial matters? We will communicate with King Yu, but I'll have to trouble you to talk to the mercenaries first. After all, war waits for no one." Well said, well said. Since that's the case, let's work together." Yang Qindong nodded. Originally, negotiations were a very taxing matter, but because of Yang Qindong's magnanimity, it didn't even take an hour before Kuang Yi left. Of course, the main reason why Yang Qindong did not make things difficult for Kuang Yi was because of the Jiaoji army. Yang Qindong's dream was to realize the Great Han dynasty's unification of the world. In order to achieve this goal, any foreign race would inevitably become his imaginary enemy. In the future, he could either conquer them or submit to them. Under such circumstances, how could he allow someone to invade the territory of the Han and ride on their heads? If Kuang Yi knew of Yang Qindong's ambitions, he would probably be willing to pay even less for this negotiation. He did not know that Yang Qindong had never been soft-hearted when it came to foreign invasions. Even if he was not invited, he would find a way to stand out and help. Chapter 345. Nanjing. As the supporting capital of Great Ming, it was the earliest capital of Great Ming. Because of Tu Mu's defeat, Zhu Qizhen of Ying's sect came here and built a new capital here. Speaking of which, Zhu Qizhen was the most special emperor of the Ming dynasty. He had set 3 records in his life. Firstly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty who had been captured. In this life, due to Yang Qindong, he was lucky not to be captured. Secondly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty. Daizong Zhu Qiyu now addressed him as such. Thirdly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty who had ascended the throne twice. When the South Ming was built, he still called himself Ingzong. He held another ascension ceremony and promoted officials. Furthermore, these records did not show that he was a great emperor. History didn't have a high opinion of him either. The process of being defeated, captured, lost his position, and restored just happened to prove that his fate was bumpy. It was because of such experiences that Zhu Qijin wanted to do something more than any other emperor to prove his ability. With that, after establishing the South Ming, he had turned over a new leaf. He gave up on eating and playing and focused all his energy on ruling the country. His dream was to unify the great Ming dynasty one day and return to the throne of the emperor in the capital of the north. Unfortunately, the heavens did not seem to have played with him enough. No matter how hard he worked, the problems that should have appeared were not small. On the contrary, they were getting worse and worse. Just as Zhu Qijin was developing the military and land, the chaos in the south still appeared. Not only that, the scale was even larger than in history, and even Jiaoji sent out troops. During the Yongle period, Zhu Di had conquered Jiaoji, present-day Vietnam. At that time, the one leading the troops was the late Duke Ing Zhongfu. With the strength of the Ming army, they defeated them and established Jiaoji province. However, as the journey was too far, there were many things that could not be done. In 1431 AD, Jiaoji province was removed, and Li Li accepted the title of Ming dynasty and became the Anan king. This was a huge blow to the prestige of the central government toward the southwest chieftains. Following which, Shi Duo proved that the negative effects of Xuande abandoning Jiaoji were long-term and fatal. This incident dealt a heavy blow to the Ming dynasty's international reputation in the western region and shook the Ming dynasty's suzerain status. Losing Annan meant losing the West. This was something that Zhu Zhanji probably did not expect. From then on, Annan continued to disturb the border and invade the land. This time, Minzhuang King Huading took the initiative to find Li Li King, who was old but still had great ambitions. After promising him great benefits, they who were already restless finally moved out. Once Jiaoji enters the war, the Yunnan affair will only get bigger and bigger. Moreover, the chaos in Guangdong seems to be mutual, so the rear is bound to be in chaos. How is he going to make Zhu Qijin focus on developing the nation's power and plotting Beiming to unify the country? Chaos meant that more people would suffer. Chaos meant that the emperor's imperial power would be shaken, which would inevitably be tainted by historians. Chaos meant that a rebellion would need to be quelled, which meant that a lot of money would have to be spent and a lot of troops would have to be mobilized. All of these were things that Zhu Qijin didn't want to see, so he naturally had a headache because of this. At this time, Empress Qian suddenly suggested asking the Duke of Loyalty for help during the banquet. In her words, since this young Duke of Loyalty could even force back the elite Walla army, he should be able to solve the chaos in the south. Empress Qian said this because she heard the words of the eunuch beside her. However, no matter who she heard it from, she felt that it made sense and said it. This was exactly what Zhu Qijin wanted. Zhu Qijin, who was familiar with history books, had seen the deeds of many wise emperors. He found that they all had a common characteristic, which was that they knew how to use people and were good at using capable people. Without a doubt, Yang Qindong was a capable person. Other than his age being too young, whether it was his experience, background, or what he had done, it all proved that he was a useful talent. Such a great talent, but he couldn't be used by the southern Ming dynasty, which made him vexed. Fortunately, Prince Cheng, Zhu Qiyu, didn't seem to know how to use people. At least when it came to Yang Qindong, he didn't use the method of using him. Instead, he kept on guard until everyone in the world could see his intentions. This gave Zhu Qijin a glimmer of hope. It could be said that the heavens were helping him. During the chaos in the south, the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong, had to leave the capital to avoid the limelight because he overthrew the Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwei. At this moment, he was in his own territory. How could he let go of such a heaven-sent opportunity? He immediately sent someone to inform the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was patrolling the various military guard stations, that he had to use Yang Qindong no matter what. As long as the other party's conditions were not too excessive, he could agree to them one by one. This led to the meeting between Kuang Yi and Yang Qindong in Hangzhou. Now, Minister Chung had reported the details of his meeting with Yang Qindong, as well as the conditions that Yang Qindong had proposed. After Zhu Qizhen read it carefully twice, he had an idea. He called the Minister of Personnel, Chun Sun, Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhe, Minister of Rights, Minister of Justice, Xiao Chua, Minister of Works, Shang Lu, and other important officials to the front of the palace for questioning. The ministers and important officials knelt first. After they rose, Zhu Qizhen said in a somewhat impatient voice, "Everyone, I wish to use Yang Qindong, the Duke of Loyalty, as a general to quell the chaos in the south. What do you all think? There is no such thing as an airtight pants in the world, especially in the palace. Often, even a trivial matter would be infinitely magnified in the eyes of the officials." Needless to say, Kuang Yi sent back a letter. It had passed through the hands of a few people to reach Zhu Qizhen. This news had long been leaked by outsiders. As officials favored by the emperor and relied on as important officials, which one of them had not experienced the ups and downs of the official world for decades. They had the ability to see through people's hearts. This time, the emperor had issued an edict, so they had gone through a lot on the way here. Now that they were asked by Zhu Qizhen, they all spoke in unison. "Your Majesty is wise." Seeing that no official came forward to stop him, Zhu Qizhen was overjoyed. He looked at the Minister of Rights, Lu De, and said, "Minister Lu, the Duke of Loyalty has made a request. He can lead the troops, but he needs Prince Cheng's approval. I want to let the Ministry of Rights do the work. How about it?" This official obeys. Lu De held the ceremonial tablet and walked out of the room. "Good, but who does Minister Lu want to send?" Zhu Qizhen nodded with satisfaction. He already knew that Lu De's brother-in-law had been humiliated by Yang Qindong in Hangzhou. However, his thoughts were the same as Minister Kuang Yi's. As an emperor, he only cared about the overall situation and would not take such a small matter to heart. At most, he would give Qi Bus Hen an official position later. Lu De did not know what Zhu Qizhen was thinking, but at this moment he said with a serious face, "Your Majesty, since it is such a big matter, this official thinks that we should send Assistant Minister Yang. This will make it more serious." The so-called Assistant Minister Yang was the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yang Shan. Speaking of which, Yang Shan was one of the 9 officials saved by Yang Qindong. His original position was the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. After he followed Ingzong to Nanjing, his position was restored, and he was still the left Assistant Minister. Yang Shan used to be an official in the northern capital, so he knew the situation there very well. He was also a rank 3 official. Even if he went to the northern capital, he would have a high rank. It could be said that Lu De's arrangement was very suitable. Good. As per your request, let Yang Shan go to Prince Cheng's place to talk. Zhu Qizhen nodded with satisfaction. This person was exactly what he wanted, so he immediately agreed. The conversation between the monarch and the official ended quickly. After Zhu Qizhen left for the harem, several important ministers left the hall in 2s and 3s, heading out of the palace. Minister of Works Jiang Yuan and Lu De walked together. When he saw that there was no one around, he couldn't help but chuckle. "Minister Lu, good method. Yang Shan will be in trouble this time." "Sigh, why did Lord Jiang say that? This old man is wholeheartedly working for the country." Lu De's expression froze for a moment. Then he shook his head and smiled. Clearly, he already knew that Jiang Yuan had seen through his little trick. Although it was a little trick, it was actually an overt scheme. As mentioned before, Lu De was the only minister of the 6 ministries who was from Nanjing. Because of this, he was a little special. This caused many people to look at him with envy and a trace of jealousy. Naturally, there were people who were unhappy. Among those who were unhappy, the most important one was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yang Shan. The left assistant minister was a rank 3 official and was only one step away from being a minister. However, it was often the step that many people couldn't reach in their lifetime. Not only did this require the emperor's favor, experience, ability, popularity, and luck. Yang Shan's luck seemed to be a bit worse. There was a Lu Da above him, and he was not much older than him. Under such circumstances, it would be extremely difficult for him to stand out. Because it was difficult. Difficult did not mean that there was no hope at all. For example, as long as Lu Da stepped down, his opportunity would naturally come. Because of this, whether Yang Shan did it intentionally or not, it was very difficult for him to walk the same path as Lu Da. This caused the problem of internal consumption. Naturally, Lu Da had noticed this long ago. However, he also knew that this Yang Shan was quite popular. In addition, he had walked out of the battlefield with Ing Zong. It seemed that compared to others, he had a bit more friendship. This kind of person was not someone he could suppress or deal with as he wished. It had to be said that Lu Da had some ability. He knew what the situation was, but he did not make it public. He just kept it in his heart and waited for the right opportunity to strike. Now, the opportunity had come. The emperor was going to send someone to Beiming to discuss some matters. Speaking of which, this was the first time that southern Beiming had come into contact with Beiming since it was established. Most likely, no one was confident in this matter, so he gave his task to Yang Shan. This seemed to be a matter of selecting talents, but wasn't it just making things difficult for him? This was because everyone could see that Zhu Qijin did not want to pay too much and wanted to get things done. This task was not easy for anyone else. Chapter 346. If things didn't go well, Yang Shan might even be humiliated. At that time, he would be able to openly attack this person. Of course, there was another reason for sending Yang Chendong. It was to make things difficult for Yang Chendong. Didn't this person slap his wife's brother's face in Hang Province? Now, he sent Yang Chendong, who had a relatively straightforward personality, to handle this matter. If this failed, Dai Zong, who was already a thorn in Emperor Dai Zong's side, would have an even harder time. This was also why Jiang Yuan said that he had some tricks up his sleeves. Regarding this, Lu Da did not explain. He only chuckled and let it go. Lu Da made his move, and the job fell into Yang Shan's hands. When the imperial edict was issued, he was in a difficult position at home. Normally, to become an official of the Ministry of Rights, one had a good temper and was eloquent. Yang Shan was good at speaking, but his personality was a little too honest. To be specific, he was a little too frank. His personality was rare among diplomats, so it was easy for him to offend some people at work. Back then, it was thanks to Hu Zhao's appreciation and help that he was able to gain a foothold in the Ministry of Rights. This was also one of the reasons why Zhu Qijin didn't promote him to Minister of Rights. Of course, Yang Shan was quite capable, especially when it came to execution. It was because of this that he became the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights without too many people objecting. However, no matter how capable he was, this matter was difficult for him. Ing Zong wanted to use the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to ask him to speak in front of Dai Zong. However, the imperial edict did not give him any authority. On the contrary, it implied that Ing Zong was one level higher than Dai Zong. To be able to use his people was giving him face. This kind of condition was difficult for Yang Shan. This became an impossible mission. Unfortunately, Ing Zong was too arrogant. Even if he went to speak, he wouldn't be able to make it clear. Instead, he would make the emperor unhappy. Yang Shan really wanted to ask the emperor for some conditions regarding this matter. Since he wanted the emperor's help, he couldn't use a commanding tone. He had to give him some benefits. Unfortunately, he probably wouldn't be able to see them because he had offended Chao Jixiang and Minda at work. Chao Jixiang was the head eunuch of Ing Zong's side, the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate. His position was similar to Wang Zhen. Once, because the eunuchs under his command acted irrationally, Chao Jixiang had censured them. Even if Chao Jixiang personally came out to intercede, it was useless. With this grudge, she naturally did not want to see the emperor at this critical moment. Minda, the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. He was also one of the important officials that Zong trusted and was in charge of the security of the imperial palace. This person also had a relative who wanted to enter the Ministry of Rites through Yangshan's connections, but was rejected at the door. Because of this, he was filled with hatred. Both ministers had been offended, and he had not received an imperial edict from the emperor to meet him. How difficult would it be to enter the palace to meet the emperor? At this moment, Yangshan realized that he was actually quite a failure as a person. At this critical moment, no one was willing to speak up for him. Could it be that the heavens wanted the Yang family to die? Once the imperial edict was issued, there was no room for negotiation. Luda even requested for him to leave the capital within 24 hours, which was 2 days. He said that the matter of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was very urgent and could not be delayed. With the imperial edict and the pressure of the officials, Yangshan was unyielding and did not beg anyone. Within 24 hours of receiving the imperial edict, which was the morning of the second day, he left the capital. Although he knew that this mission would be very difficult to complete, if he did not go, the Yang family would also be unlucky. Using himself to exchange for the safety of his family, no matter how he looked at it, it was worth it. When Yangshan left, he did not even say goodbye to anyone. He just took the corresponding document that could prove his identity and left. Naturally, no one thought highly of him when he left this time. Even the entire Yang residence was filled with the sound of crying. It was as if they knew that the chances of their master going this time were slim. Even if Dai Zong did not kill him, if he could not complete the mission, Zong would not spare him when he returned. This was because of the last time when he left the capital, there was someone behind him who made King Yu the emperor. Since coming to the capital, Zhu Qizhen had been more careful. For example, he was more cautious about the ability of his subordinates to manage them. For a third-rank official like Yang Shan in the capital, there were naturally hidden sentries of the embroidered uniform guards around the residence. Normally, they would keep an eye on everything here. Once they discovered any abnormal movements, they would immediately respond to them. But now that Yang Shan had left from outside, there were sorrowful cries coming from the residents every day. This made the embroidered uniform guards who were in charge of monitoring feel sympathetic and relax their guard. Even when they saw an opera troupe enter the Yang residence, they did not do much inspection. The opera troupe performed for 3 days before it ended. Even if the opera troupe was closed, there would still be cries coming from time to time. Yang Shan brought the relevant documents to prove his identity from Nanjing. He traveled through wind and rain all the way. It took him only 8 days to cover a distance of nearly 1,200 kilometers. It was nearly 300 kilometers in a day. Even with his body, it was unbearable. But Yang Shan had no other choice, because he was worried that if he was negligent, he would be charged with another crime. If that happened, all his hard work would be for naught. For the sake of his family, he had no choice but to rush along. In his grief and indignation, by the time he reached the capital, he had fallen ill. The capital had already received news of Yang Shan's arrival. And with the exaggeration of Luda and the others, the purpose of his arrival was already known in advance. In the throne room of the imperial palace, Zhu Qiyu had already pushed away all the things on the dragon table in anger. At this time, his chest was still panting heavily. It was obvious that he was very angry. It was no wonder. Luda had spread the news that Yang Shan came to the capital as the representative of Zong Zhu Qizhen to reprimand Zhu Qiyu. Having no monarch, father, brothers, and ministers were the 4 major crimes. It was to show the righteousness of the Southern Ming and to show that the Southern Ming was the legitimate identity. As for speaking up for Yang Qindong, it was just a matter of convenience. It gave people the feeling that the person who Bai Ming was giving face to Prince Cheng. When the news first came, Zhu Qiu had already lost his temper in the imperial palace. It was said that a blind eunuch was even kicked twice because of this. This was the second time he had lost his temper in the main hall. Relatively speaking, this was more of an act for the officials to see. At the same time, it was also a kind of test. To be able to enter this palace, which one of them wasn't a shrewd old thing. At this time, all of them had their heads lowered. When they raised their heads, their eyes were filled with anger. They expressed their dissatisfaction with Baiming, dissatisfaction with Zhong Zhu Qizhen, and their support for Zhu Qiu, as well as their determination to stand together. After all, Zhong was once their master. The ancients said that loyal officials did not serve two masters. The fact that everyone was still standing here meant that they had already lost their position as officials. At this time, it was naturally not good for them to criticize anyone. Otherwise, if this spread out, it would be detrimental to their reputation. The officials of ancient times still regarded their reputation as extremely important. At least on the surface, they did things very well. It was because of this that even though they knew that Zhong had gone overboard, none of the officials stood out to say anything. Everyone's silence was perhaps the main reason why Zhu Qiu lost his temper for the second time. Zhu Qiu himself was the clearest about the process of ascending to the throne. It was an extraordinary act in extraordinary times. It was because of this that he was even more worried that things would repeat themselves. If these officials overthrew him, like how they had pushed him to become the emperor, what should he do? At that time, it might be impossible for him to return to being Prince Cheng. He was afraid, so he needed his officials to express their loyalty. Only then could he feel more at ease. Otherwise, if there was really a day when he went up against Zhu Qizhen, who knew if there would be someone behind him who would stab him in the back? One side was probing, while the other side was thinking about their own reputation. This formed a kind of invisible confrontation, just like now. No one spoke, and an awkward atmosphere naturally arose. What? Don't you have anything to say? The atmosphere in the throne room was very quiet. Finally, the young Zhu Qiu, who was wearing an imperial robe with a golden dragon, could not hold himself back and took the initiative to speak. However, there was a trace of anger in his voice. The emperor was angry, and the officials were nervous. However, they were only nervous. It was not to the extent of being afraid. This time, it was not just one person who did not express their opinion. Instead, all the smart people did so. With the mentality that the law could not punish the majority, what was there to be afraid of? This was the so-called the law could not punish the majority. Even if you were the emperor, there was nothing you could do if the people below didn't say anything. Some people would say, "Isn't the emperor the most powerful? If they don't listen, you could just kill them." However, if you really did this, all the officials would be in danger. Who would dare to work for you? Your country would naturally be unstable. After questioning, there was still no one speaking. The angry Zhu Qiu decided to call out names. He wanted to force everyone to express their opinions. Although this method would lose the emperor's face, in order to stabilize his position, he could not care less. His gaze swept over the officials. The first person he saw was the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao. Speaking of which, Hu Xiao was the oldest among the officials. He had also been an official for the longest time. He had served many emperors of the great Ming dynasty. At the same time, as the Minister of Rights, his attitude was extremely important. Zhu Qiu looked at Hu Xiao and said, "Beloved official Hu, why don't you speak first? What is the difference between the Southern and Baiming dynasties? Who is the true orthodox?" Suddenly being called out, Hu Xiao, who was holding a ceremonial tablet and wearing official robes, trembled slightly. There was a struggle and hesitation on his face, but he did not know what to say. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.